The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301, 3-Day Tour of Magic City 7. Sherlock's exclamation successfully attracted the attention of everyone in the room, especially Hu Yifei. Looking at the little foreigner in front of him, Hu Yifei went through all the faces she had met since childhood and didn't find any similarities. Frowned even more. After all, according to the information, Sherlock had never set foot on the land of Rabbit, but after actual contact, he found that Sherlock was familiar with everything about Rabbit. Especially this time, Sherlock actually called out the name of the old professor's apprentice, and he looked very familiar. Do you know him? Finally couldn't help asking the doubts in his heart. Facing A's question, Sherlock could only smile awkwardly and couldn't say that he knew Hu Yifei on TV in his previous life. Fortunately, Sherlock's brain reacted quickly and he immediately found the answer. Oh, nothing. I just read a few papers of Dr. Hu Yifei before, and now seeing the real person is like seeing someone from a movie. Although Jia was still a little suspicious of Sherlock's words, Hu Yifei on the other side had an expression of I understand. After giving Sherlock a look of fellow travelers, she turned around and started chatting with Tony. After all, Tony is Iron Man, the technical leader of Stark Group, and the maker of iron armor. Any of them can be said to be an absolute star in the scientific research circle. Even in some elementary schools in Eagle Source, Tony's head portrait has been hung with big guys like Newton and Einstein. However, although Jia, Hu Yifei and the old professor let Sherlock go, it does not mean that Tony will let Sherlock go. Ever since Sherlock gave that lame excuse, Tony's eyes have fallen on Sherlock from time to time. As uncles and nephews who often hang out together, Sherlock naturally sees the signals conveyed in Tony's eyes clearly. You are a magician. If I could read a doctoral dissertation in engineering, I would eat up the whole office. Sherlock naturally rolled his eyes at Tony's undisguised contempt. You have a lot of responsibilities. When you have time, you should think about how you should teach. Have you made the course? Have you written the lesson plan? Have you graded the homework? After a long argument with Tony, Sherlock took the initiative to cut off the signal on his side and sat down expressionlessly. Although he seemed calm on the surface, he was actually in turmoil. Damn, who would have thought that he had traveled to what kind of weird world? My goodness, is Eagle Source's place a Marvel world of fighting to the death? Every day, bullets fly when they disagree, and they show off their American AI skills to each other, and aliens occasionally show their presence. And Rabbit's place is a harmonious and happy comedy. They focus on both scientific research and love, and their life is plain and happy. Sherlock silently shed tears of envy in his heart. It can only be said that not only reincarnation is a technical job, but even time travel is a technical job. What kind of unfortunate life has she lived in? Especially when seeing Tony and Hu Yifei's hands holding together, Sherlock really broke out in a cold sweat for Tony. It is estimated that Tony would never have thought that the woman who shook hands with him, who looked very delicate, actually had a unique martial art called Danyishan. It was even so powerful that it could hit Tony against the wall and he couldn't get out. This is because Tony's anxiety disorder has improved a lot. If he knew that Hu Yifei had such a skill when Tony's anxiety disorder was not cured, it is estimated that Tony should be wearing the anti-Hulk armor and shaking hands with Hu Yifei now. What can I say about that picture? It's very interesting just to think about it. Although he was thinking about it, Sherlock was actually a little relieved and a little looking forward to it. After all, now that Hu Yifei is here, it means that there is a character that must be mentioned that may also appear here. Zoojdali. Which boy can not like Zoojdali who he saw in AWO? This time, Sherlock can have the honor to witness his screen goddess with his own eyes. In fact, Sherlock's guess was not wrong at all. That afternoon, Sherlock saw the legendary Zoojdali. Just like the feeling when watching the TV series, this girl is indeed bold and careful, a super female student who may surpass the computer with the human brain. When Sherlock was in Tony's class in the afternoon, He watched this girl ask Tony questions in class, and the discussion between the two became gradually outrageous in the question and answer between the two. Even at the end of the course, Sherlock clearly saw that except for the old professor, who was drinking with Tony, he had an expression on his face that said, "I understand, there is a successor." The rest of the people, including Hu Yifei, had an expression of what the hell are these two talking about? Of course, after this class, Tony developed a strong interest in this talented female student who could keep up with his thinking. He immediately handed Zujdali an invitation to the start group, and said that, as long as Zujdali was willing to come, Tony would teach this girl as his successor. You should know that Tony's conditions are generous. When Tony said this, it meant that the girl in front of him could inherit his title of Iron Man. It is not an exaggeration to say that, even if he inherited the start group, he would not refuse. But unfortunately, Zujdali refused on the spot, after thinking about it, and said that he needed to build his own motherland, but he was still willing to have scientific research exchanges with Tony. The two also exchanged contact information on the spot, and this trip to Shuangdan caused by an accident was also concluded. Sherlock, Jaya and Tony took a taxi and left Shuangdan University. What? Since you are here, why don't you go to the legendary apartment and take a look, just as a reminiscence of childhood? Don't joke, that's someone else's life. Sherlock said that, after he took the AK-107 from his own shop, when he traveled through time, he was destined to have no chance of living this kind of life. Sherlock could only sigh helplessly, and then silently wished Zujdali and Zhang Wei a happy marriage. What a good marriage. Damn Zhang Wei. The hatred of stealing a wife is irreconcilable. Of course, Sherlock was just thinking about it. After all, it was one thing to post a barrage at the beginning, but if he really ran in front of the person and posted a barrage, it would be very embarrassing. Chapter 302, 3 Days in the Magic City 8. When Sherlock and the other two returned to the hotel, the group of lesbians who went out shopping had also returned to the hotel. Usually, after the lesbians come back from collective shopping, there will be a grand meeting to divide the spoils. Sherlock naturally did not want to miss this excitement, and the most important thing was that everyone came by private plane, so there was no problem of too much luggage. Those things that could not be used could be packed and sent to the plane first. Anyway, the plane is still parked in Pudong Airport. When Sherlock really walked into the meeting to divide the spoils, Sherlock once again clearly felt the different personalities of the lesbians present. Let's talk about Ziola Jio first. Because she is the CEO of Stark Group and Sherlock's future aunt, she belongs to a small group of people whose wealth is at the top of the pyramid anywhere in the world. Therefore, Ziola Jio is not very interested in luxury goods such as high-end luxury. No, it cannot be said that she is not interested in high-end luxury. To be precise, she is not interested in the so-called luxury goods defined by the West. On the contrary, Ziola Jio likes the high-end luxury of Rabbit. As we all know, the luxury goods of Rabbit are different from those of Donkey or Hermes. Those branded items are just selling a brand at most. Most of the money you spend is actually the brand premium, and the actual cost may be only 1%. But the luxury goods here are different from the Rabbit. The main point is that I have something that you don't have, and you can't even imitate it. After all, even ordinary people can go for the Donkey brand Hermes, and at least they can buy small items like belts and wallets. But the luxury goods of the Rabbit are really, if you can't afford it when you are born, then it will be really difficult for you to afford it again in your life. So when Sherlock saw Ziola Jio take out some single-sided sew embroidery, double-sided sew embroidery, shoe brocade, yarn brocade and the like, he was a little dumbfounded. Especially the double-sided sew embroidery. Sherlock racked his brains to figure out how to show a cute kitten on one side and a cute puppy on the other side. Not to mention the top quality ink pads and ink blocks. Each one of them is a good thing that Sherlock could only see in the documentary of CCTV before. Especially when Sherlock knew that Chile had also ordered a lot of the same gold bricks as the Forbidden City. His eyes widened, and he hugged his future aunt's thigh, and cried and shouted that he wanted some too. In the end, Chile could only touch Sherlock's head lovingly, while calling the manufacturer to express that she wanted to place an additional order. Let alone Sherlock, other people don't understand, but B, C, and D do. Especially A and B. Just looking at the things Chili bought, the corners of their mouths twitched. To be honest, if it weren't for their status, even A and B would want to hug Chili's thigh and shout Godfather. Compared with Chili's things that look low-key, but are actually extremely luxurious, the things that Black Widow bought are much easier to understand. Clothes. All kinds of clothes and cosmetics. After all, as the world's factory, at Rabbit, as long as you want, you can buy almost any clothes you want, whether it is new products of the season or the new products of the next season. That's right, it's amazing. Rabbit can not only sell you the latest products of the season, but as long as you have money, even the new products of the next season can be sold to you. This is not uncommon. You have to know that before Sherlock traveled through time, it was just the new products of the next quarter. It was not difficult for the Rabbit. Compared with the two more mature women, the things bought by Antonia were very much to Sherlock's liking. Like Sherlock, this girl also had a bit of a funny personality. The things she bought were all kinds of weird things. The carrot knife, the telescopic sword used by the old lady for fitness, as long as it was something this girl had never seen. This girl bought one after another. Sherlock even found a yo-yo and a four-wheel drive car and a complete four-wheel drive track in the spoils bought by this girl. Sherlock was not polite and performed a set of yo-yos for Antonia on the spot, which made Antonia bow down and ask Sherlock to teach her this set of peerless martial arts. The four people A, B, C, and D just watched Sherlock and Anthony's nonsense with twitching mouths and kept sighing in their hearts that the influence had spread abroad. Especially Ding, as the youngest female among the four people. If it weren't for the wrong identity and environment, Ding would have shouted to Sherlock, "Little Blackie." As for the two little Lalita, Lana and Mindy, well, the two Lalita are still at the age of appetite, and they are not very interested in toys and clothes, but all kinds of snacks can be said to be completely on the hearts of the two Lalita. That guy, Tang monk meat, wee long spicy strips, figs, a scallion and other messy snacks brought back a whole sack. As a former Rabbit, Sherlock naturally accepted all these snacks. While playing with Antonia's strange toys she bought, he occasionally ate the snacks of the two Lalita. Of course, since the female comrades went out to buy things, they naturally couldn't avoid bringing gifts to the men. Sherlock of others doesn't know, but Black Widow gave Sherlock an Hermes wallet. After Pepper gave Sherlock a set of gold bricks, she also gave Sherlock a complete set of Suzhou embroidery. Sherlock liked it very much and decided to put the Suzhou embroidery and other things given by Pepper into the library for permanent collection at night. The remaining two Lali were much simpler. They didn't care about Sherlock stealing the snacks they bought and just regarded it as a gift for Sherlock. The only thing to say is Antonia. How to say it? Looking at the gift given by Antonia, even the four people A, B, C, and D couldn't help but twitch their mouths. Antonia gave Sherlock a power bank that looks like a bomb. That's right, it looks like a bomb with cylinders trapped in a bowl and a screen with several lines in it in the movie, but this thing is a power bank. And it's not just Sherlock. Antonia didn't forget the rest of the people. The one she gave to Tony was a power bank with a meow hammer, and the ones given to Sherlock's 5 uncles were power banks in the shape of magazine. It can only be said that Antonia, the internet addicted girl, has suffered from severe battery anxiety since Sherlock and Tony made prosthetic limbs for her and began to transform into a cyberpunk girl. In response, Sherlock said that this is a disease and must be cured. Chapter 303, Lost on the Green Train 1. Because everyone had booked tickets for the green train that departed at 6:30 p.m. on the third day, no one had the motivation to go out during the day on the third day. That is, Sherlock's 5 uncles mysteriously dragged A, B, and Tony out. Sherlock didn't want to know what these old men were doing. He just wanted to lie quietly on the bed and pack his luggage to prepare for the train trip he had been thinking about in the evening. It was not just Sherlock who was preparing. The railway general was also busy. Logically speaking, the railway general has transported countless players like the railway general, whether they were politicians from various countries or Olympic athletes who were the pride of heaven. Tony's trip was at most to receive foreign wealthy businessmen, so there was no need to be so nervous. It should be the kind of trip that has some diplomatic significance, but not much significance. However, there is a but for everything. All of the experience of the railway general is her mother's high-speed rail. The big green skin is the first time for the railway general. What's more, it's the sleeper berth inside the big green skin. God knows how devastated Taizong was. He really couldn't figure out why a super rich man with an iron armor and a private jet would come to his train, and he was wearing a green leather jacket. It's okay to not figure it out, but the most important thing is that the other people in this group are not so easy to serve. Look at that guy named Simon Riley. The photo on that guy's passport is actually a photo of him wearing a skull mask. Speaking of which, Taizong really wants to go to the other side of the ocean to open the head of the American official who issued the passport and take a good look. Is it really so that such a photo can appear on the passport? However, since the superiors have agreed to Sherlock's travel request, they naturally notified Taizong and even gave Taizong the basic information of several people in order to avoid unnecessary trouble. Looking at the information in his hand, Taizong's hands trembled and even made a sharp explosion. These are all players who can kill hundreds of people. They are real killers. Taizong is really afraid of what will happen if something that should not be detected is detected during the security check. Finally, the superiors gave the head of the railway a reassurance, and they should do what they should do. However, even so, the head of the railway still had some lingering fears. The closer they got to the departure point, the more nervous they became. Sherlock didn't know the situation at the head of the railway. At nearly 4 o'clock, Sherlock ran to the supermarket to buy a batch of supplies that could be used on the road, and then everyone packed up and set off for the train station. As for the head of the railway, out of the principle of caution, they specially sent someone out to look out. After seeing Sherlock and his party get off the car, they immediately informed the people inside through the intercom. Attention, attention. VIP has arrived at the entrance. Repeat, VIP has arrived at the entrance. All departments pay attention. All departments pay attention. This is not a drill. This is not a drill. Although the head of the railway was extremely nervous, Sherlock and his party seemed to be fine. After all, before setting off, Sherlock had already popularized the national conditions of the rabbit side with everyone. In the boxes of the people present, except for clothes and food and drink, there was really nothing illegal. All the illegal things were in Sherlock's library, including Tony's armor, Sherlock's uncle's guns, Black Widow's equipment, etc. It's not that the people present didn't believe in the safety of Rabbit, but that they were used to being cautious. If they really didn't bring anything, they wouldn't feel at ease. So the whole process of entering the station was unusually smooth, and there was no abnormality that Taizong was worried about. The only exception was Antonia. After all, this girl's arm was a prosthesis, and there was no way to disassemble it. In desperation, Antonia could only show everyone the seams of her prosthesis to show that this thing couldn't be taken off. Coupled with the coordination of A, B, C, and D, Antonia finally passed the security check successfully. What? Those functions in Antonia's arm? Don't joke, okay. That is the most perfect product of the combination of magic and technology. As long as Antonia, Sherlock and Tony don't say it, none of the muggles present can see it. Naturally, several people would not be stupid enough to really show things like the mantis knife, but Antonia's prosthesis really couldn't be taken off, so she passed the check safely. From this point of view, Antonia may be the only person in the history of the China Railway Corporation who has brought contraband on the train. Putting aside the small episode of security check, everyone was extremely excited after entering the station, even Tony. Although Shanghai Station is an old train station built in the 1990s, it is not as old as it looks in the past few years under the upgrade of Rabbit, the infrastructure maniac. Everything inside maintains Rabbit's usual high level. It is not an exaggeration to say that this train station, which is almost 30 years old, is even more advanced than the construction of some airports in the Eagle Source's home. No wonder these people have been sighing, as if they have never seen the world. After all, if you have experienced the train transportation system in the Eagle Source's home, you will also sigh. Damn, can you imagine that the rails, which are crucial to the operation of the train, have already had 18 bends, and they can still run. Sherlock can even say without bragging that the big green skins on the Rabbit's side are as comfortable as the Eagle Source's trains. After all, the only trains that can make Sherlock feel carsick are probably the trains of the Third Brothers family and the trains of the Eagle Sources family. It can only be said that the developed car culture in the Eagle Source family has a reason, and it is all forced out. Sherlock and his group are like ordinary people who are taking a train for the first time. They line up to check their tickets, and then line up to walk towards the train carriage. Fortunately, Sherlock and his group are all in a carriage, which has a total of 6 rooms. Sherlock, Black Widow, Ding and Mindy are in one room. Pepper, Lana, C and Antonia are in one room. Tony, Price, B, and Ghost are in one room. And Soap, Xiao Qiang, Gates and A are in one room. There are 6 rooms in a train, and Sherlock and his group occupy 4 of them. What makes Sherlock most depressed is that among the 4 rooms, he is the only one who shares a room with 3 women. Seeing the meaningful look in Black Widow's eyes, Sherlock finally couldn't help but run to Tony's room to change into pajamas. After all, the train would take a whole day and 20 hours and 32 minutes to reach the terminal. Sherlock didn't want to wear outer clothes for more than a day and a half. Since there were no outsiders around, he might as well change into comfortable pajamas. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304, Lost on Journey 2. When Sherlock had changed his clothes and passed by the room of Soap, Xiao Qiang and others, his eyes almost popped out. At this time, there was an open suitcase on the floor of the 4 people's room. The suitcase was filled with nothing but wine. Beer, white wine, foreign wine, red wine. There was nothing that was not in it, except what you didn't know. The small table in the room was already filled with all kinds of snacks, and the 4 people had already started drinking in the room. Looking at this scene in front of him, Sherlock felt a little uncomfortable. Good man, I was wondering where you guys went mysteriously today. It turned out that you went to buy wine. But then again, we haven't driven yet, and you guys are drinking. It's almost a 2-day trip. Are you sure this wine is enough? While complaining in his heart, Sherlock glanced at the wine and the big box in the middle without making a sound. Well, it's definitely enough. I have to say that the people in this car are really ruthless. Even that person B is a ruthless person. Haven't you seen that Shy and Soap, Xiao Qiang and Gaz, who had drunk so much that their faces were flushed, bragging about their previous missions, and were stunned by what they heard? Well, Sherlock silently drew a cross for this B in his heart, praying that his liver would be intact after this journey. After all, both Gaz and Xiao Qiang were heavy lovers of alcohol. Seeing the situation in Soap's room, Sherlock also began to feel curious about the situation in other rooms. He turned around and quietly returned to the door of Tony and Price's room and began to listen quietly in the corner. Soon Sherlock left the door of Tony and Price's room with a dark face. Damn, these old men are actually in class. Can you believe it? It can't be called a class to be exact. It's just playing military chess with the help of Tony's 3D projection. Even A participated in it. Price and Ghost have carried out many missions. They are naturally handy for such real-time military simulations, and even added a lot of necessary conditions. Tony thinks he is very smart, so he is naturally very confident in such military simulations. As for A, although he didn't know the specific situation of this buddy, he was able to enter the system, and was influenced by the teachers. Naturally, he would not be afraid of the other 3 stupid foreigners, and he was also eager to try. With the help of Tony's stereoscopic projection, the 4 old men seemed to have really transformed into generals, and began to scold Fang Qiang on the train. Sherlock also learned about the 4 people's strange victory rewards. You are awesome. Whoever loses has to say to the other 3 people, you are awesome. How to say it? It's a bit interesting, but not much. Turning around and moving forward, Sherlock returned to his room. At this time, the 3 women in the room had already started playing landlord under Ding's call. Obviously, the 3 people's landlord had no place for Sherlock, and Sherlock didn't bother them. Thinking that they would experience nearly 2 days of life together, he took the food he bought in the suitcase and prepared to visit the people in the other 2 rooms. when passing by Xiao room. Although the door of the room was not opened, Sherlock still understood from the crisp collision sound coming from inside that, damn, this group of people were actually playing mahjong. Sherlock was speechless. He didn't even know how to react for a moment. He listened to the crisp sound of mahjong tiles colliding in the room, and the melodious sound of Xiao's gong bang hu. He sighed silently. I hope that my group of female comrades will not indulge in the game of mahjong after they go back. I hope. Silently passing Xiao's room, Sherlock took the pork cartilage instant food he had prepared in advance and knocked on the doors of the other two rooms. As the door opened, Sherlock was a little stunned and even called out the name of the person who opened the door. What the hell? Director Zhang Hu? Director Hu looked at the young foreigner holding a beautifully packaged pork cartilage instant food outside and shouted out his name on the internet with a face full of question marks. So his fame has spread abroad? Director Hu looked at the very enthusiastic Sherlock with a confused face and took the gift handed over by Sherlock in a daze. Then he took a group photo with Sherlock in a daze, and then he seemed to react with the attitude of not hitting a smiling person. Director Fox also started chatting with Sherlock Zhaluoka. Through chatting, Sherlock learned that this time Director Fox was going to introduce this railway line that runs across China. It is for this reason that Director Fox and his party will embark on this train. It must be said that compared with engineering talents like Tony or Zujdali, Sherlock can still understand what Director Fox, a humanities and geography master, said, and also told Director Fox about his own experience when he was traveling by car. The conversation between the two was very smooth. After a while, Sherlock realized that he had to visit the next fellow rider on the same trip and hurriedly said goodbye to Director Fox. Of course, Sherlock did not forget to play a trick when he left and wished Director Fox Zaori to find the trace of the water monkey. Director Fox was embarrassed, but the director was sure of one thing, that is, Sherlock was indeed his fan, and the water monkey was also an old joke among his fans. After bidding farewell to Director Fox, Sherlock was in a good mood, feeling like a fan seeing his idol, and knocked on the door of the last room with a smile on his face. As soon as the door opened, Sherlock was stunned, and then he became visibly excited, because the one who opened the door was a sweet girl that Sherlock could only see on TV in his previous life. Bing bing. Excuse me, what can I do for you? Seeing Sherlock's excited face, Bing Bing thought he was a fan of hers, and asked politely, based on her excellent qualities as a CCTV reporter. After hearing Bing Bing's words, Sherlock immediately handed over the gift in his hand, and said to Bing Bing, "Oh, although my heart belongs to Bing Bing, but, no, I'm a fellow rider, this is a small gift from me, please accept it." In front of the person himself, Sherlock played a wave of internet memes, which made Bing Bing reveal a little funny in her embarrassment. She smiled at Sherlock and took the gift in Sherlock's hand. Chapter 305, Lost on Journey 3. Facing Bing Bing who received the gift, Sherlock didn't know what to say for a moment, although in his previous life, Sherlock could be so annoying and call her his wife on the internet. But when he actually saw the real thing, Sherlock was stuck. Fortunately, Bing Bing was quite considerate, and this was a train, a public space, so Bing Bing was not afraid of anything bad happening. So she said to Sherlock, "Would you like to come in and sit down?" Facing Bing Bing's invitation, and the fact that she was a super beautiful sweet girl, Sherlock admitted that he was moved and agreed to Bing Bing's invitation without any hesitation. It was not until he entered the carriage that Sherlock realized that compared with other rooms in the carriage, Bing Bing's room actually made people feel a lot more crowded. The reason was also very simple. Various waterproof boxes occupied most of the space, and there were one woman and two men in the carriage where Bing Bing was. After seeing Sherlock come in, the three of them also greeted Sherlock enthusiastically, and several people began to chat quickly. Through the conversation, Sherlock learned that Bing Bing and the others were reporters sent by the central bank to promote the most beautiful Sichuan Tibet line, and they were part of the supporting team of Director Who next to them. Sherlock was stunned by what he heard. What Sherlock didn't know was that Bing Bing and Director Who and others should not be here, but it might be that the higher-ups secretly colluded with the China Railway Corporation to arrange this trip in order to take care of Sherlock and his party. After all, compared with the other ordinary people, national players like Director Who and Bing Bing are undoubtedly much more stable and can also guarantee the convenience of the work of the 4 people A, B, C, and D to the greatest extent. After all, the style of the rabbit has always been to seek stability, and Sherlock and others are the biggest source of instability for the rabbit. Of course, although Sherlock felt it a little, he did not point it out, but chose to continue talking to Bing Bing. Since Bing Bing has explained her situation, Sherlock also explained his situation under the circumstances of reciprocity. Of course, Sherlock is not a fool. Sherlock will definitely not tell the truth about what he and his 5 uncles do. After all, if Sherlock really tells it, even a well-informed CCTV reporter like Bing Bing will be scared. There are only a few people who can be like the cute boy with a baby voice. Of course, apart from those who cannot be told, Sherlock did not hesitate to tell everything. It can only be said that Tony, the jerk, and Pepper are really famous. Bing Bing's whole face lit up when she heard their names. Especially when she knew that the 2 were in the same train car with her at this moment. She was extremely excited. As a reporter, there are few reporters who do not want to interview those big shots, and Bing Bing is no exception. Sherlock has always had no resistance to sweet girls. Faced with Bing Bing's request, he agreed without hesitation. But Sherlock probably never thought that his unintentional act this time would make the rest of the journey a little crazy. After the train started, Sherlock quickly went back to find Tony, who was having fun with Price, and explained the situation. After all, they were friends in the same compartment, so Tony didn't refuse. In this way, under Sherlock's urging, the passengers in the entire compartment unexpectedly got to know each other, and it made people feel unexpectedly harmonious. After several people got familiar with each other, Sherlock realized that his impressions of Director Fox and Bing Bing were just filters. God knows why Director Fox can drink with Zhao Qiang and soap just a few hours later, and a sweet girl like Bing Bing can actually play Majin with Black Widow and Bing. And Sherlock is not much better. He and Bing Bing's photographer also experience the equipment of the central bank. It must be said that the national equipment is really awesome. That guy is impeccable from the operability to the accuracy of shooting, worthy of being the exclusive magic mirror of the central bank. Since the whole carriage started to get familiar with each other, it began to become unusually lively. The green train seemed to have a natural social attribute, prompting everyone to gain a different kind of friendship in this small world. Everyone was noisy until it was dark, and Sherlock remembered something he had always wanted to do. He quickly pulled Bing Bing and his exclusive photographer, as well as Tony and Soap, who were joining in the fun, to the hard seat area. Youth has no price, and you can get to LS by sitting hard. This sentence has never been a joke made by netizens, but a real thing. Maybe because of the lack of money, or maybe it is simply a belief. There is never a lack of brave people who take this sentence as a creed on this train every day. Of course, most of these brave people are young people. After all, for older people, sitting in a hard seat for 20 hours a day will really make their old waists unable to withstand it. For older people, such a long hard seat is not a belief but pure torture. Anyway, Sherlock admires this group of warriors very much. Of course, because there are mostly young people, the atmosphere of hard seats is undoubtedly the best compared to soft sleepers or hard sleepers. Even though the carriage of Sherlock and his group was lively enough, when everyone really stepped into the hard seat carriage, the excitement and vitality, the lively atmosphere full of hormones still made everyone feel unusually novel. However, after all, except for native locals like Bing Bing and the photographer, the rest of the people who followed Sherlock to the hard seat to feel the atmosphere were all players who received pure education from the Eagle Source family. They were naturally good at parties, especially Tony, who was always the absolute star of the party. Coupled with Tony's world-famous reputation, Sherlock's arrival naturally brought the atmosphere of the entire hard seat to a peak. Even Tony, the showy player, performed a song on the spot, which attracted cheers from the young people present. Even tough guys like Soap and Zhao Qiang performed a wave of lame dances, but although the dances were funny and lame, there was no sound of ridicule, only everyone's kind smiles. All of this was faithfully recorded by Bing Bing's camera, and coupled with Bing Bing's beautiful writing, it is almost certain that nothing can better illustrate the beauty and freedom of this trip. Chapter 306, Lost on Journey 4. The train arrived at Xining Station in the evening of the second day. This was the last stop before reaching the plateau. Everyone needed to transfer to the aerobic train dedicated to the plateau here. Sherlock was very excited about this. Like most people present, Sherlock carefully cleaned the windows of the train with a towel he brought with him. Well, after all, it is the tradition of the train to Tibet. The stupid plain people always clean the windows of the train very cleanly, saving a lot of effort for the cleaners. Just when Sherlock was wiping the windows of the train with great interest, a young man ran to Sherlock's side, seeming a little embarrassed. Seeing that Sherlock was about to finish wiping the glass, the young man repeatedly mustered up the courage to run to Sherlock and tried to communicate with Sherlock in poor English. Sherlock frowned and listened for a long time without understanding what the young man was saying. Finally, Sherlock couldn't stand it anymore and said something to this brother who spoke English haltingly. "Can you speak Chinese?" When Sherlock asked this question, the young man opposite was stunned for a moment. After a long time of reaction, he seemed to suddenly realize something. "Oh my god, I forgot, my friend, you seem to know Chinese, so I want to trouble you about this." The handsome guy spoke with an authentic northeastern accent, which surprised Sherlock. Although his English was halting, it still had the flavor of London's old Zhenghuangqi. Sherlock looked at the big brother who spoke northeastern dialect with some surprise and confirmed one thing: there is absolutely no such species as a domineering CEO in the northeast. After all, just looking at the appearance of this guy, he has reached the level of a domineering CEO, but for some reason, that mouth always gives Sherlock a silly feeling. Speaking of it, the reason why the young man found Sherlock is very simple. This guy also believes that youth has no price. Hard seat direct to LS. After seeing Sherlock, Tony and the national goddess Bing Bing in the hard seat carriage that day, the young man has always wanted to invite these people to take a photo in front of the temperament of faith. After all, there are pictures and evidence. If he hadn't said that his youth has no price, he took a hard seat directly to LS and met Iron Man and Bing Bing, he would definitely be regarded as a fool. Maybe he might even say, "Iron Man can be a green skin." Stupid. Faced with the young man's request, Sherlock agreed to the young man's proposal without hesitation. Even if the young man didn't mention it, Sherlock wanted to take a photo with everyone after wiping the car window. After all, such an experience is a rare experience among these people who want to save the world at any time. Therefore, after Sherlock and the young man agreed on a place, he immediately turned back to his own carriage and told everyone about it. As expected, everyone responded to Sherlock's request. Everyone followed Sherlock to the gathering place with excitement. Even Price, who had always been serious, had a smile on his face. When Sherlock led everyone to the gathering place, the young people holding the banner of youth has no price, hard seat directly to LS couldn't believe their eyes. Who did they see? Not only Iron Man Tony Stark, but also the CEO of Stark Group, the legendary strongest woman on the surface, and Iron Man's lover Pepper. There was also a beautiful woman with red hair. Compared with Tony, this person is less famous. It was only mentioned in a large number of declassified files that appeared on the internet not long ago. Former SHIELD senior agent, Black Widow Natasha Romanoff. In addition to the curvy figures of Sherlock's 5 uncles, there were even many girls who were obsessed with uncles. When they saw the whereabouts of the 5 uncles, their eyes were green. Compared with these people, Sherlock and Director Who and Bing Bing standing beside Sherlock looked much more ordinary. Well, it was mainly because Director Who was ordinary. After all, Sherlock was extremely handsome, and Bing Bing was sweet and cute. Only Director Who was ordinary. Well, this is definitely not to say that Director Who has no characteristics. He has, but it is not obvious. The arrival of several people undoubtedly pushed the happy atmosphere of these young people to an absolute climax. Everyone quickly lined up, making Sherlock and his group the absolute center of the team. Then under Sherlock's command, the group followed the local customs and shouted eggplant. The red words on the pure white flag, combined with the license plate Shanghai LS that everyone deliberately left, the whole photo looked harmonious and beautiful. After a while of crazy fun, everyone stepped onto the new train under the urging of the conductor. The seat number was still the original seat number, and the number of the bed in the room did not change. The only change was that there was an oxygen supply port above the head of each seat and bed in the carriage. This is for those who have a strong altitude sickness. If the altitude sickness is really severe, you can ask the train attendant for an oxygen tube and directly connect the oxygen supply port at the head of the bed to quickly breathe oxygen to relieve the altitude sickness. Sherlock and his party also entered their respective rooms with a nervous mood. This time, they were not as excited as when they just drove. On the one hand, it was because it was night and everyone needed to rest. On the other hand, Xining's altitude was about 2,000 meters. No one knew whether there would be altitude sickness in the next journey, so the most important thing was to ensure rest. Therefore, everyone went to bed early. However, even if everyone made sufficient preparations, and even stopped all training before the start of this trip, to reduce the probability of altitude sickness, it was not as expected. Many people in Sherlock's group still had altitude sickness. The most serious one was Sherlock's 5 uncles. When they woke up early the next morning, Sherlock's 5 uncles almost instantly changed from peerless tough guys to well-behaved and cute kittens, and they couldn't stand up at all. Compared with Sherlock's 5 uncles, Tony, whose body had been hollowed out by alcohol and sex for many years, was unexpectedly fine. The same situation as Tony was with Pepper Potts. The two of them were still as lively as usual. In addition to these two people, the rest of the people had more or less some altitude sickness, especially Black Widow, whose symptoms were almost the same as Sherlock's 5 uncles. Even Sherlock felt headaches and chest tightness early the next morning. Of course, this is not the most embarrassing thing. The most embarrassing thing about altitude sickness is actually the imbalance of air pressure inside and outside the body. The air pressure inside the body is higher, while the air pressure in the external environment is lower. So naturally, humans will have an instinctive reaction to help the human body reduce the air pressure in the body, that is, farting. The sound of farts one after another almost never stopped in the entire carriage. Farting is not terrible, at most it is just a little embarrassing, but some people's altitude sickness has another symptom that must be mentioned, that is, a bad stomach. A bad stomach combined with uncontrollable farting. Well, that effect, whoever has experienced it knows. Chapter 307, Lost on the Green Train 5. With the onset of symptoms of altitude sickness, the originally lively carriage became much quieter. Sherlock lay on the bed groaning, constantly trying to kill Tony with his eyes. Fortunately, there is a way out for those who are mean. Even if Tony was fine, he began to suffer from altitude sickness due to the drastic change in altitude when the train crossed the Tangela Pass. Unlike Sherlock and his people had already adapted their bodies to the climatic conditions of high altitude areas due to the early symptoms of altitude sickness. But Tony was not like that, so he experienced all the symptoms and embarrassment that Sherlock and his people encountered. Of course, Tony was like this, so he ran over to ask Sherlock if there was any special medicine as soon as the symptoms appeared. Well, after all, there were 4 accompanying personnel, and Tony was not stupid enough to directly say magic potion or something, but changed to special medicine. But unfortunately, Sherlock did not have any special medicine for altitude sickness. After all, it is a small place like John Bull, and it is difficult to find more landforms. Where can there be magic potions for the plateau? Moreover, even if there are, according to Sherlock's personality, he will start to show off magic potions as soon as he feels altitude sickness. Do you still have to go through the embarrassing situation of having a splitting headache and not believing any fart? It can only be said that altitude sickness is the dictatorship of everything. The only 4 people in the carriage who are in the best condition and can walk around are Director Fox. Sherlock even went to ask how these 4 masters who have no farts did it. The answer he got was also very simple and crude. Nothing else, just practice. In response, after getting this answer, Sherlock directly gave Director Fox and his group a big eye roll and said that he would stop being a fan right now. No discussion. Fortunately, although everyone had symptoms of altitude sickness, they adapted very quickly. When the train arrived at LS station, as long as they were not doing strenuous activities, they would not have any unbearable symptoms. As a result, an extremely dramatic scene appeared on the train platform of LS station. Sherlock and his group each pulling their own suitcases, moved forward slowly like a turtle. The slow speed would be fine, but the most important thing is that, because they didn't take a shower, their image was far from as bright and beautiful as when they were in Shanghai. Men were okay, at most their hairstyles were like a chicken coop, and if they put on a hat, that was it. But women were really uncomfortable, including beautiful women like Pepper and Black Widow who usually pay attention to their image, but now they look sloppy with their hair. The most important thing is that, after arriving in LS, you can't take a shower immediately, because taking a shower will accelerate the body's oxygen consumption and easily cause altitude sickness. Fortunately, Tony relied on his money to get a place to stay before the train arrived, and the hotel also sent a car to pick up Sherlock and his group. Their sloppy image was at most the distance from the train station to the exit. As for Director Fox and the sweet girl Bing Bing, well, the poor kids won't stay in LS for long, because their mission is to promote the most beautiful railway line on the plateau. After leaving the train station, they turned around and went back to the ticket office of the train station. The workers are really miserable. Compared with Sherlock and his group, who were a little depressed, the driver who came to pick up Sherlock and his group was much more lively. He gave everyone scientific tips while driving along the way. He also recommended some local delicacies and told them to try them after they got used to it. This time's hotel can be said to be one of the best hotels in the entire LS. After entering the hotel room, you can see the majestic Potala Palace as long as you open the curtains. And in order to prevent accidents, this time the room arrangement is not one room per person, but 2 people per room, so that everyone can take care of each other. After nearly 2 days of train travel, although the scenery along the way is indeed a beautiful view on Earth, the fatigue of the journey still makes everyone just want to rest quickly at this moment. Therefore, the first day in LS passed in a very hasty way, accompanied by the snoring of everyone. When Sherlock got up early the next morning, he felt refreshed and no longer felt uncomfortable. When he ran to the bathroom to wash himself clean, he suddenly felt a strong sense of being spied on. As a magician, Sherlock always trusted his intuition, but this was the first time that he felt that his intuition was not so accurate. It was no wonder that Sherlock felt this way. Whether it was magic or technology, Sherlock had used almost all the ways he could think of and still couldn't find out what was spying on him. Even in suspicion, Sherlock even checked the entire bathroom inside and out and didn't find anything wrong. This feeling didn't disappear even after Sherlock walked out of the bathroom, which made Sherlock himself start to wonder if his nerves were a little sensitive due to altitude sickness. Without finding any reason, Sherlock could only suppress the strange feeling in his heart and temporarily immerse himself in the beautiful scenery outside the window. After all, they are traveling, and they are in XZ, which is known as the last secret place in the world. The beautiful scenery is still worth Sherlock's display. Let go of the strangeness in his heart. Otherwise, in Sherlock's previous life, XZ was the white moonlight of many social animals. The scenery and humanities that are completely different from any other place in the world will really make people feel reluctant to leave. The unique plateau environment makes this place like a fairyland left behind by the world. Anyway, Sherlock and his party are thoroughly immersed in the unique humanistic environment brought by XZ. At least Sherlock is like this, but according to Sherlock's observation, Zhao Qiang, Soap and others do not seem to be immersed in the humanities and scenery, but are more immersed in the first attempt of Highland barley wine. The female comrades are more immersed in the unique ethnic costumes in the snow area. The Potala Palace, Barker Street, as long as it is a landmark building that can be named, these female comrades can be said to have not let go of any of them. Although in Sherlock's view, there is an indescribable sense of weirdness when his pure foreign faces wear traditional Tibetan costumes. Compared to the above people, the focus of Tony and Price, who are the oldest in the group, is quite strange. Maybe it's because of their age or some other reason, they actually pay attention to the unique cultural relics in the snowy area. Sherlock can't stop them, and they finally bought a lot of specialties. As for whether these specialties are made in Yahoo or are really old goods as the vendors say, it is really unknown. Chapter 308 Snowy Secrets and Black Cat. The group stayed in LS for nearly 3 days. During these 3 days, they visited almost all the most famous attractions in LS, except for the Potala Palace, which could be seen in the room. Because this thing needs to be booked with an ID card, except for A, B, C, and D. None of them have this thing. If they want to visit the Potala Palace, they can only rely on A, B, C, and D to work and see if they can make an appointment. Finally, under the coordination of the 4 people, the date for everyone to visit the Potala Palace was set 10 days later, which happened to be the last stop of this trip. But to be honest, Sherlock can be said to be very satisfied with the 4 people A, B, C, and D. Sherlock didn't feel it when he was in the Magic City, but after arriving in LS, these 4 people seemed to have switched their status. From travel guides to hidden delicacies, to explanations of scenic spots and purchases and reservations, the business was called proficient. Sherlock even once doubted whether these people were going to take the civil service exam or the tour guide exam. Of course, during this time in LS, Sherlock was always accompanied by the feeling of being watched. Even when Sherlock took a magic wand and searched for several times without outsiders, he still couldn't find it. Sherlock's nerves were a little weak. Putting aside Sherlock's small problem, LS still gives people a very beautiful feeling. And there is another unique feature of traveling to LS that must be mentioned. That is, looking at the whole rabbit, it is estimated that only LS wants to sign up for a group after arriving in LS. That's right, the scenery of the snow area is never in LS, but on the way to LS. But unlike ordinary people just sign up for a group, join the tour group, and follow the leader to play around. And Sherlock and his party, because of the existence of Tony, a big local tyrant, and the large number of people, had no idea of signing up for a group. Tony waved his hand directly and hired a leader tour guide. The tour guide is only responsible for driving and leading the way and arranging the route. The tour guide does not need to take care of all other things. As for the remaining transportation, which was originally the responsibility of the travel agency, Tony, the wealthy dog owner, waved his hand and bought 4 off-road vehicles in the local area as a means of transportation. He bought them in the identities of A, B, C, and D, and said that the car was given directly to the 4 people, and he was only responsible for paying the money. Such a wealthy dog owner's behavior made A, B, C, and D feel upset for a while, and they felt a shock from the wealthy dog owner for the nth time in their lives. It's amazing that when Sherlock left the LS city by car, the sense of verism that had been lingering on Sherlock suddenly disappeared without a trace. This made Sherlock more and more curious about the source of this sense of verism. However, despite his curiosity, Sherlock decided to devote his energy to the trip first. After all, the scenery he saw along the way can only be seen here. It is worthy of being known as the closest place to heaven. The clouds floating in the sky always give people a feeling that they can reach out and touch them. Sherlock and his party were also very lucky, and there was no bad weather along the way. We didn't miss any of the scenic spots such as Risheo Jinshan, Mount Everest, Ningxi, and Yamdrok Lake. We also experienced the circumambulation of Mount Kailash. Sherlock felt that his legs were not his own. When the guy saw the off-road vehicle again after a circle, Sherlock felt happier than when he saw that he had a warehouse of weapons. If you want to say what made Sherlock linger the most in the whole trip, it was the wild hot springs on the way from the northern Tibetan grassland to Selinko. No one can refuse a natural, steaming foot bath. No one. The last day of the trip was to return to LS via the Nyan Kantangla Mountains. In fact, there are many places Sherlock wants to go, such as Hosel and the secret Medag, but unfortunately, they are not included in the itinerary, and Sherlock didn't force it. Anyway, as long as he wants to, he can open the portal and come back to play. After several days of playing, Sherlock almost forgot the feeling of being peeped. However, this feeling did not let Sherlock go. The moment Sherlock returned to LS, it surged into Sherlock's heart again. It made Sherlock feel bad. He almost went crazy on the spot and shot everywhere with his wand. What made Sherlock feel the most bad was that this damn people was just watching. Purely watching. He didn't do anything but observe. It would be better to stand up and fight him openly. However, what surprised Sherlock was that this feeling of being peeped around him all the time disappeared in an instant when Sherlock and his party stepped into the Potterless Palace. It was as if some force blocked the peeping from somewhere. This situation came very suddenly, so suddenly that Sherlock was a little bit unresponsive. When Sherlock reacted, he couldn't help but feel awe for the Potterless Palace. However, a black cat quietly appeared at the end of the team without anyone noticing. Sherlock discovered this black kitten when he was about to climb to the top of the Potterless Palace. As a cat lover, Sherlock had no resistance to this little coal ball at all. He squatted down and waved at the little black cat. Sherlock originally wanted to fight this little black cat. After all, cats' habits are destined not to trust a human in such a short time. But what Sherlock never expected was that he just waved his hand, and this little black cat seemed to understand what he meant, and ran to Sherlock. After carefully sniffing the smell of Sherlock's fingertips, this originally cute little black cat immediately turned into a green tea little cat, lying down and exposing its belly, to try to seduce Sherlock. He succeeded. Sherlock couldn't resist the temptation of the little cat at all, and he started to rub it directly. You can't say, the little cat feels really good. And the most amazing thing is that this little black cat that came from nowhere only allows Sherlock to pet it. Even if others get close, they will be mercilessly blown away by the little black cat. The most amazing thing is that after Sherlock petted the kitten enough and put it on the ground, this cute kitten actually followed Sherlock like a tail. No matter how others tried to seduce it, it ignored it. Even if you try to take the kitten away directly, the kitten will ruthlessly punish you with its claws. Who can not love a kitten that is loved exclusively? Anyway, Sherlock can't do it. In just a few minutes, Sherlock has already fallen in love with this little black cat without a trace of color on its body. He even thought of adopting it, but this is the Potterless Palace after all. It is someone else's territory. Sherlock doesn't know if this kitten is raised by someone in the Potterless Palace, so it's not easy to take it away directly. Chapter 309 The Magical Little Black Cat. After all, Sherlock is a complete cat lover, and he has no resistance to the little cat that is acting like a spoiled child at his feet. Sherlock didn't think much about it, and directly picked up the little black cat at his feet, ready to hold it in his arms, and love this charming little cutie. It was not until Sherlock picked up the little black cat that he found that there was a small golden copper coin-like pendant about the size of a fingernail hanging around the little black cat's neck. Generally speaking, stray cats will never have such precious pendants, so this little coal ball that is very good at acting like a spoiled child should be a kitten raised in the Potterless Palace. Sherlock expressed great regret for this. Sherlock really likes this kitten, not to mention that as a serious wizard, Sherlock still has no pet. Sherlock really doesn't like pets like owls. After all, the Marvel world doesn't need to use owls to send letters to people. Compared with owls, telephones are more popular. If you happen to have a guy named Tony Stark around you, you can even use a 3D projection phone that is far beyond modern technology. Compared with owls, cats are in line with Sherlock's expectations. On the one hand, Sherlock really likes cats. On the other hand, cats and wizards are a traditional combination, and there is no better match than this. The most important thing is that this kitten is a little black cat, which can be said to be a perfect match for the combination of wizards, witches and black cats in fairy tales around the world. Just when Sherlock was struggling to decide whether he could ask the staff of the Potterless Palace whether he could buy or adopt this kitten, a kind and low male voice suddenly came from behind Sherlock, but the male voice was in Tibetan, and Sherlock didn't understand a word. Sherlock, who thought he had committed some taboo, quickly put down the little black cat in his arms, ignored the little black cat's crazy coquetry at his feet, and quickly stood up and turned to look at the source of the sound. What caught his eye was a kind-looking llama from the snow region. When he saw Sherlock turning around, he quickly put his hands together and bowed slightly to Sherlock and said something in Tibetan. Sherlock turned around with a confused look and looked at A, B, C, and D who had been following the team. This trip to the plateau relied on these four people to act as the leader and translator. For Tibetan, only A, B, C, and D and the entire team could understand it. When Sherlock turned around and looked at A beside him, A's face looked very strange. Sherlock had never seen A with such a strange face during the entire journey. A's 3 views were also exploded at this time. He looked at the kind-looking old llama for a while, and then looked at Sherlock, who was standing there looking at him with a confused face, wanting to say something but stopping, and stopping again. Seeing A's hesitation, Sherlock finally couldn't hold back and slapped A on the shoulder. "What are you doing?" "What did the master opposite say?" After being slapped by Sherlock, A seemed to react, and quickly put his hands together, and bowed to the master. After the two of them exchanged some words, he turned around, and looked at Sherlock with a strange look on his face and said, "This is the reincarnated living Buddha living in the Potala Palace. This little black cat is the guardian of the living Buddha." Today, the guardian seemed to have sensed something, and ran out directly, and fell at your feet. The living Buddha said that he had never seen the guardian so close to someone he had never seen before, proving that Sherlock and the guardian are predestined, and hoped that Sherlock could adopt the guardian. Sherlock was shocked. He had only heard of the living Buddha's name before, but this time he saw it for real. If it was in his previous life, Sherlock would definitely sneer at the idea of reincarnated living Buddhas, but now, Sherlock has experienced a sudden change to a different world, and has mastered mysterious powers such as magic. He was in awe of the reincarnated living Buddha. He dared not be in awe. After all, in Sherlock's magic system, although there was no real means to resurrect people, it was definitely not difficult to achieve such a reincarnation. If you don't believe it, you can ask the man named Voldemort who plugs a nose, and you will know that this guy used a similar reincarnation method to control a poor guy named Quirrell to try to find his nose, although he failed in the end. With awe, Sherlock hurriedly put his hands together and bowed slightly to the living Buddha, who looked very kind, and asked Jaya to translate for him, saying that he was willing to adopt this little black coal ball. After listening to Sherlock's words, Jaya turned around with a strange expression on his face and said something to the living Buddha. The living Buddha also looked relieved and took out a pendant from his arms that looked like a coin with the same scenery as the one on the kitten's neck, and came to Sherlock. With a smile on his face, he put his hands around Sherlock's neck. Sherlock looked terrified, but he still politely bowed slightly to accept the gift from the living Buddha. Sherlock could feel that, although the pendant given to him by the living Buddha was not an alchemical product or even a magic product, it was just an ordinary pendant. But for some reason, this pendant, which should have been made by a muggle, had a power similar to magic, and compared to magic, this power gave people a feeling of both holiness and ruthlessness, as if it was a god looking down on all living things from above. Sherlock didn't know what this was, but out of politeness, he asked A to translate his words of thanks for him. A also nodded, and after talking to the living Buddha for a while, the living Buddha nodded with satisfaction, bowed slightly to Sherlock, and turned to leave. Seeing the living Buddha leave, Sherlock picked up the small coal balls on the ground and held them in his arms. While rubbing them repeatedly, he ran to A and asked with a mean look on his face, "What did you two just say? I saw you talking a lot just now, and you just dismissed me with just 2 words." A looked at Sherlock, who was standing in front of him with a smug look on his face, with a strange look on his face. After taking a few deep breaths, he said to Sherlock, "Nothing, just telling you that you will always be a friend here, and you will be protected here, no matter what happens in the future." Sherlock didn't take A's words to heart. After all, Sherlock felt that according to his own strength, he would not face the situation described in A's words. But what Sherlock didn't know was that in the conversation between A and the living Buddha just now, the living Buddha always addressed Sherlock with the highest level of title in Tibetan Buddhism, and his status was even much higher than that of the living Buddha himself. A looked at Sherlock, who was standing beside him with a smug look on his face, and really couldn't imagine that this guy was the one who could be compared with the Buddha in the living Buddha's mouth. Chapter 310, The Kitten with Two Tails, Part 1. Most of the facilities in the Potala Palace are not allowed to be photographed. Sherlock and his group did not violate this rule and followed A to visit all the places. I don't know if it was because of the kitten. Along the way, the staff and llamas in the Potala Palace bowed to Sherlock respectfully when they saw him, which made Sherlock nervous to hold the kitten in his arms and return the greeting every time. The whole picture looks like a kind of holy fire meow meow church missionary. When everyone came out, after visiting the Potala Palace, Sherlock, who was holding the kitten in his arms, was surprised to find that the feeling of being peeped at by him disappeared without a trace. Therefore, Sherlock liked the kitten in his arms even more, and even put his hands on the kitten's head and rubbed it repeatedly with a smile on his face throughout the whole process. Well, it feels good. After finishing the trip to the Potala Palace, this trip to the plateau has come to an end. Everyone plans to fly home directly. After all, no one wants to take another train trip. Although the train to Tibet has always been a dream for Sherlock, when Sherlock really realized his dream, if he was asked to experience it again, Sherlock would refuse. After everyone rested in the hotel for a whole day, Tony's plane landed in LS Ganga Airport. Everyone boarded the plane with their spoils very satisfied. Well, unlike everyone else who left with big bags and small rolls like fleeing famine, Sherlock just held a kitten in his arms. For Sherlock, this little coal ball can be said to be the most satisfying harvest of Sherlock's trip. Because it is a private plane, there are no so-called problems of airlines not allowing pets on the plane. Sherlock calmly held the kitten and sat on a luxurious recliner, waiting for it to key off calmly. With the roar of the plane engine, the plane soared into the sky like an arrow from a string. To be honest, planes and trains are completely different. The towering snow-capped mountains seen on the train looked like ant-sized waves on the plane, one layer after another, and even Tony, in order to realize Sherlock's words "I will be on the top of the mountain and see all the small mountains," specially asked the plane to fly around and pass by Mount Everest. It has to be said that Mount Everest is worthy of being the world's highest mountain, although everyone went to the Everest base camp at the foot of Mount Everest to look up at this mountain that is on the list of textbooks all over the world. But now looking down in the sky, you can still feel the majesty of Mount Everest, and the feeling of looking down on the world is reflected in Mount Everest. Until now, Sherlock felt that the education in his textbooks in his previous life had completed a perfect closed loop at this moment, and he really felt how correct the description of Mount Everest in the textbooks was. After seeing the majesty of Mount Everest, the plane turned around and flew towards Eagle Source's home, which also represented the official end of this journey. Because it was a private plane, there were only Sherlock and his group in the cabin, so the atmosphere was much better than that of an airline plane. After the plane flew around Mount Everest, everyone started to discuss. The ladies were sharing their beautiful photos and the ethnic costumes of this trip, while the men were sharing the various small things they bought and some souvenirs they wanted to give away. Sherlock had no concerns about this at all. He stroked the kitten in his arms wholeheartedly and listened to the purring of the kitten. Of course, everyone would not forget that there was Sherlock on the plane, nor would they forget that there was a cute kitten on the plane. After chatting with each other for a while, the female comrades took the lead in focusing their attention on the cute little one in Sherlock's arms. Although it was the same as before, as long as they got close to this little cutie, they would get the little cutie's baby breath. But this group of women still enjoyed finding cat snacks that they didn't know when they bought to try to bribe the little cutie in Sherlock's arms. Among them, the two little girls in Sherlock's house are the most concerned. So far, they have changed dozens of flavors of cat strips. Where has the little guy seen such a temptation like a pool of wine and a forest of meat? From the beginning, he breathed on such people, gradually became confused, and then gradually began to be unable to withstand the temptation. He wanted to try to get out of Sherlock's arms, to taste those small strips that smelled very fragrant, but it seemed that he was afraid that Sherlock would think too much and kept looking at Sherlock with his eyes and then looking at the cat strips of various flavors in the hands of those women. It seemed that he was struggling whether to go or not, and his little face even became strange because of the entanglement. Sherlock looked at the entangled look of the kitten in his arms and his heart almost melted. In the end, he couldn't stand the kitten's begging expression and gently patted the kitten's butt. After receiving Sherlock's signal, the kitten jumped out of Sherlock's arms with excitement and cautiously tried the cat strips in the hands of those comrades. Then, finally, he was succumbing to modern technology and life and began to lick the cat strips in the hands of the group of lesbians crazily. Of course, in this process, he was inevitably rubbed by the group of crazy lesbians. The little coal ball also went from rejecting it at the beginning and hiding from everyone's palms to finally sinking into the deliciousness of the cat strips and letting everyone rub it. Seeing that the kitten had sunk into the deliciousness and became the plaything of the lesbians, Sherlock just smiled and didn't say anything and began to focus on the scenery outside the window. It is said that, as long as you come to XZ, everyone will leave their souls here and only take away the body. Now Sherlock thinks this sentence is not wrong at all. Looking at the scenery outside the window, Sherlock only feels a strong sense of reluctance. Even Sherlock feels that this is definitely not his last trip to XZ, and he may set foot on this magical land again in the future. Just when Sherlock was immersed in his emotions, the group of lesbians who were robbing the cat in the cabin suddenly heard a burst of exclamations. Hearing the exclamation, Sherlock quickly turned his gaze over there, only to see that at this moment, Lorna, who had one hand on the back of the little coal ball, was looking at the butt of the little coal ball in front of her with a surprised look and shouted, "Look, the little coal ball actually has two tails." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311, The Kitten with Two Tails, Part 2. Two Tails. Sherlock went over immediately after hearing Lorna's exclamation. After a closer look, it was really as Lorna said, this cute little coal ball really had two tails. However, at the beginning, because this little coal ball was so black that you couldn't see the blackness of its facial features without opening your eyes, and the two tails were always mixed together and hiding in Sherlock's arms, Sherlock really didn't realize that this little guy was different from an ordinary cat. Sherlock carefully examined the little black cat and finally found nothing different. After all, according to Sherlock's generosity, whether it was an ordinary kitten or those magical kittens, Sherlock could be said to be open to all. After all, the predecessors of the magic world, the famous first generation exclusive savior of the Dark Lord, told everyone that sometimes even those magical little guys are assistants that cannot be underestimated. God knows how desperate Grindelwald was when he looked at the army of magical animals summoned by Newt on the opposite side. Damn it, others are fighting alone, and it's his turn. What a guy summoning flow. However, although Sherlock was very open-minded, he was still very curious about the race of the little guy. According to Marvel's Nature, the first race that Sherlock thought of was the little guy with the name Fat Orange, and pronounced Eater of the Element. But unfortunately, Sherlock picked up the little guy and checked for a long time under the confused gaze of the little guy, but he did not find any characteristics of the Eater of the Element. Sherlock even took out his magic wand, and the final result of the inspection was that it was an ordinary kitten with two tails. Although Sherlock was very sure that his inspection results were definitely wrong, because he could not find out what was wrong, Sherlock could only give up helplessly. Just think of this as a cute, soft and ordinary kitten. Sherlock picked up the kitten and sucked on the kitten's belly repeatedly, thinking so. Well, it tastes right, it's just an ordinary kitten. Sherlock stared at the two little girls with eyes that looked like they were looking at perverts, put down the kitten in his hand that was rolling its eyes because of Sherlock's sucking, and said to everyone. Sherlock was responded by the collective eye rolls of the group of female lesbians, who all raised their middle fingers to show their admiration for Sherlock. With the fights and quarrels in the cabin of the plane soon landed in New York, behind Sherlock's training ground. The advantage of having an airstrip at home was immediately reflected. After getting off the plane, you can throw yourself directly on your soft big bed. As for the plane, well, Tony said that this ordinary civil airliner was absolutely not worthy of entering the hangar that he regarded as a workshop. So after putting everyone down, Tony, who was rich and powerful, let the plane perform a wave of takeoffs and landings and returned to the New York airport. Everyone's life returned to the peace at the beginning. Because of this team building trip, Hawkeye, who was forced to stay at home to watch the house, also received a large number of gifts brought back by everyone. Among them, the gifts brought back by Sherlock were the most fucking inhuman. Have you ever seen a good person bring back all the teaching materials from kindergarten to high school for a newborn baby, and they were in both Chinese and English, with Corsair? In the end, Hawkeye, with a dark face, through Sherlock, who had been shouting pay attention to the education of children, There are only 4,000 days left before the college entrance examination. Out of the door of the room. Although Sherlock's philosophy is correct and Hawkeye also wants his children to receive the so-called elite education, this does not mean that from now on, this little guy who is not even a month old should start working hard. Hawkeye feels that his child still deserves a good childhood. Of course, apart from this episode, the rest of the days are actually similar to the past. The training ground at Sherlock's home has started operating again, and because of the expansion of the training ground and the increase in the number of subjects taught, the business of the training ground has also begun to get better. Sherlock's 5 uncles and 2 little lalas began to hold guns, and began to train the unlucky people sent in by the major forces with vulgar and obscene words. Black Widow and Hawkeye also began to find time to systematically train Antonia, and Tony occasionally made some simulated real-life training, and other things for the 3 to use. It seems that from Tony to Black Widow to Hawkeye, all 3 of them intend to absorb Antonia into the Avengers. Of course, there are also Captain America, Falcon, and Hulk. Although the 3 are not in Sherlock's training ground, and did not participate in this team building, they still put their gifts in the room built for them. It's just that, well, that gift, well, how to say it, it can be as small as a box of cigarettes or as large as a whole set of clothes. In short, there is everything. Of course, if you insist on saying that there are differences, it is not without them. The most typical one is Sherlock. Sherlock has a little tail that can't be shaken off from now on. No matter where Sherlock goes, this little cat with 2 tails will always follow Sherlock, never leaving, and even run to Sherlock's shoulder or head from time to time to play a life pendant. And since Sherlock and others discovered that he is a cat with 2 tails, for some reason, the 2 tails of the little coal ball have never been entangled again. And according to Sherlock's observation, the 2 tails of this little guy can be said to be extremely flexible, and the most interesting thing is that the 2 tails can be said to be swinging separately, which is very interesting. Anyway, it was the first time Sherlock saw a 3-way fight between the tail and the main body of the kitten, but the scene was very chaotic for a while, and even Sherlock, who was well informed, didn't know whether he should go up to break up the fight. Of course, occasionally there would be unusually harmonious scenes among the 3 parties, such as when the little guy ate something he particularly liked. The 2 tails would cooperate very well to make a perfect heart. This little discovery made the women in the training ground extremely crazy about this kitten, always wanting to take all kinds of food to try to seduce a kitten that was firmly following Sherlock. As a result, after only a few days of returning, Sherlock felt that the weight of this little guy who had been following him had increased a lot, and even began to develop in the direction of a devouring beast. Only then did he quickly stop this behavior. Although the gas tank was cute, Sherlock was still ruthless to stop these crazy women for the sake of his spine and cervical spine. After all, it was not a good experience to hold a gas tank on your head. Sherlock was not the 3rd brother, so he didn't have this habit. Of course, apart from this, what Sherlock couldn't understand the most was why a pure rabbit cat like little coal ball could understand English. Damn it, Sherlock couldn't believe that his English was not as good as that of a cute little cat. After all, the main reason why Sherlock could speak English fluently as his mother tongue was because of the benefit of time travel. Otherwise, well, do you know what it means? That the level 4 exam is a chasm that I can never get through in my life. Chapter 312 Animagus, Part 1. After returning home, Sherlock had nothing to do for a whole week. This time, Sherlock really lived a life like a young master in ancient times, farming, playing with cats and dogs, and occasionally walking birds. As for why so many small animals suddenly appeared in Sherlock's house, well, the reason is actually very simple, because Sherlock stopped the Black Widows from wanting to tease their little coal balls. The Black Widows who were eyeing their little coal balls eventually transferred their love for the little coal balls to other small animals, so for a while, there was a trend of raising pets among the Black Widows in the entire training ground. From raptors and eagles, to beasts and giant bears, to crickets and insects, Sherlock even felt that this was almost a complete outline of biology. And because there were so many animals, it was inevitable that your pet would be the food of my pet. For the harmony of his own family, Sherlock could only helplessly take out the magic potion specially used to tame animals. Sherlock accidentally found this thing on the corner of the vending machine in his library. To be honest, this thing is not very useful. It can only make wild animals understand human language, slightly increase their IQ, and make pets more docile and friendly. Other than that, it is useless. Besides pet animals, the rest of the things that drink this thing can be said to be useless. It tastes fishy and has nothing to do with deliciousness. In fact, think about it. Otherwise, why would so many owls in Harry Potter listen to wizards? There must be some tricks. The Black Widows who got the potion were of course overjoyed. They fed their pets the potion given by Sherlock. Of course, it was only the animal part. As for insect pets, Sherlock did not give it. On the one hand, the potion does not work on insects at all. On the other hand, most of the Black Widows who like insects are guys who like fighting insects. What they raise is not a pet, but a fighter. Sherlock was shocked by the replacement and consumption rates. If they really provided potions, even if all the gold in the world was consumed, it would not be enough for these people to make. Of course, thanks to Sherlock's behavior, the lives of those unlucky students in Sherlock's training ground became even more miserable. After all, the original combat training was to fight with people, but now the combat training actually requires fighting with wild beasts such as wolves, tigers, leopards, bears, and black bears. Fighting is fine, and if you win, it's okay. If you lose, you won't get hurt, but you will get the contemptuous eyes of those animals. That's right, it's a contemptuous look. God knows how broken your defense is when a brown bear that stands more than 3 meters tall looks at you with a contemptuous look, as if to say, "You little dog, are you worthy of fighting with me?" Anyway, for a while, the training atmosphere in the entire training ground was unprecedentedly enthusiastic. After all, if you run, there will be wild beasts such as wolves, cheetahs, and lions chasing you. You have to fight hard. Although they won't kill you, if you run slower, these beasts will bite you. They are not polite at all. Almost everyone on the training ground has 2 bite marks on their buttocks. Of course, the training ground is so hot that the students' training enthusiasm is forced to rise every day. Sherlock will naturally not be idle. He also passively started his own practice with Sherlock. That's right, Sherlock, who was idle, finally remembered the final magic of transfiguration that he had mentioned several times, animagus. Sherlock was also very curious about what he would become. Therefore, he also started the practice of animagus. However, this practice process can be said to be really fucked up. Take a look at the process, written in the book 1. For a whole month, from full moon to full moon, you must keep a single leaf of mandrake in your mouth. You cannot swallow the leaf, or take it out of your mouth at any time. If the leaf leaves your mouth, the whole process must start again too. Take the leaf out at full moon, fill a crystal vial with saliva, soak the leaf in it, and let it receive pure moonlight. If it is cloudy that night, you will have to find a new mandrake leaf and start over. Add a strand of your hair and a silver teaspoon of dew, which must be collected from a place without sunlight or human contact for 7 days, to the crystal vial in the moonlight. Finally, add a pupa of a grimace moth. Keep this mixture in a quiet dark place, and do not look at it, or disturb it until the next thunderstorm 3. While waiting for the storm to come, do the following at sunrise and sunset. Point the tip of the magic wand to the heart and chant the spell, Amado, Animado, Animagus. The first 3 steps alone are enough to make people feel desperate, not to mention the 60, 70, 80, and 90 steps behind. Sherlock was stuck on the first step for about 2 months. If Sherlock puts the damn leaf under his tongue, he will swallow it accidentally. Even if he sleeps too deeply at night, he will accidentally spit out the leaf. For 2 whole months, Sherlock's hair was a mess, and the dark circles under his eyes could not be covered. He looked like the empty young man in the past. As for why Sherlock is like this, if you can't sleep well, or eat well for a month, you will be like this. The damn second step is even more annoying. God knows why you need to fill a small bottle with saliva. Isn't this just a test of the function of your oral glands? And damn, in the end, you have to drink this thing yourself. You have to drink a big bottle of saliva. Sherlock feels sick just thinking about it. Sherlock really doubts the mental state of the guy who invented this magic. Of course, when Sherlock was practicing animagus, the people around Sherlock were watching the whole process. Everyone was very curious about Sherlock's magic practice. After all, they had never seen how Sherlock's magic was made. Being able to observe Sherlock's animagus training with their own eyes was also a rare experience for them. Facts have proved that Sherlock is a time traveler after all, and God still takes care of Sherlock. After completing the first two most difficult steps, the conditions for the remaining steps were all gathered in just 1 month. So, under the watchful eyes of the Avengers, some Black Widows, Sherlock's 5 uncles, 2 Lolis, and Little Cole, on a night before a storm, after the first lightning appeared in the sky, Sherlock drank the potion that had been brewed for more than a month in one gulp, pointed his wand at his heart, and recited the spell that Sherlock had been waiting for a long time. Amado, Animado, Animagus. Chapter 313 Animagus, Part 2. With the deafening roar of thunder in the sky, which was much slower than lightning, Sherlock's body began to change. Sherlock's whole body began to shrink and curl rapidly. A black bony beak gradually appeared on his mouth. His eyes began to turn blood red, and colorful black feathers began to appear on his body. But Sherlock did not pay attention to his own changes. The reason was very simple. Since Sherlock recited the animagus spell at the moment when the first lightning appeared, a strong and powerful heartbeat came out of Sherlock's body the next second. As the heartbeat became more and more deafening, this sudden second heartbeat gradually merged with Sherlock's own heartbeat, and the frequency began to unify. After the two heartbeats were unified, they became a deafening heartbeat. Sherlock did not even hear the thunder outside. Just when Sherlock was still thinking about what would happen next, a severe pain spread to Sherlock's whole body in an instant. Sherlock even felt that his flesh and bones were constantly being torn, twisted, and crushed by an invisible force. However, due to the potion and magic, Sherlock couldn't even faint in the face of such severe pain. He could only rely on willpower to resist. However, people's willpower has a threshold. Sherlock himself didn't know how long he had persisted. It could be a moment, an hour, a day, or a year. Sherlock didn't know. Just when Sherlock was about to give up, the pain that devoured his mind seemed to disappear as quickly as a spring, as if it had never appeared, and was replaced by an indescribable impulse. An impulse from the most instinctive beast began to invade Sherlock's mind. Fortunately, Sherlock was very fresh at this time, and with the precedent of being affected by the obscure entry last time, Sherlock's brain block technique has never been put down. Even when traveling, Sherlock did not forget to practice brain block technique every day. Hard work pays off. Facing the beast instinct that hit Sherlock's brain like a tide, Sherlock's brain was still very clear, and he clearly realized that he was Sherlock, a traverser, the only real wizard in the world. Therefore, the most difficult part of the entire animagus process was as simple as eating and drinking water for Sherlock, and there was no difficulty at all. However, it was also this strong beast instinct that Sherlock knew what his animagus was, a raven that symbolized death. After the beast instinct hit Sherlock's brain for a while without success, it slowly receded like a tide. At this point, Sherlock had truly completed his first transformation of animagus. Of course, Sherlock didn't want to turn back to his original human appearance right now. After all, it was the first time Sherlock had turned into a bird in his 2 lives. Sherlock certainly had to experience such a novel experience. Curiously, Sherlock opened one of his blackbird claws. Sherlock wanted to try his new body, and then, as expected, Sherlock's beak came into close contact with the ground. Well, it's not Sherlock's fault. After all, it's his first time to be a bird, and Sherlock is slowly trying to figure it out. If it were normal, if Sherlock fell flat on his face, everyone in the training ground who knew Sherlock would definitely come and laugh at him. But now, although everyone Sherlock is familiar with is watching Sherlock's animagus, no one laughed at Sherlock who just tripped over his left foot. Everyone's face was a unified expression of shattered worldview. What did they see? Just now, Sherlock, in front of everyone's eyes, turned from a human into a raven with blood-red eyes and a body that is a circle larger than an ordinary crow. You know, in normal times, although Sherlock can use magic, everyone is more accepting of Sherlock's other magic, whether it is explosions, fire, or the emission of small beams of various colors, or even changing materials and landforms. After all, in their opinion, although these magics are powerful and magical, they are still similar to the ammunition fired by humans using weapons. In their subconscious, the magic fired by Sherlock using a magic wand is actually the same as the bullet fired from a gun. But now, Sherlock has prepared magic for 2 whole months. Everyone almost watched Sherlock change from a human to a bird. The species has changed. Especially Tony, who looked like science no longer exists, and biology has collapsed. He couldn't understand why Sherlock changed from a human to a bird when the DNA of humans and birds is completely different, even more so than that of humans and dogs. What everyone present thought, Sherlock didn't know. At this time, Sherlock was happily experimenting with his new body, just like a child who found a new toy. Everyone almost watched Sherlock, who seemed to be a child who couldn't even walk, try to move his legs little by little, and slowly from the beginning, he would trip over his left foot and fall to the ground, to being able to run around like a real crow. The whole process was extremely fast, as if all the childhood of a child was condensed into just a few minutes. Of course, walking was just Sherlock's starting point. What Sherlock really wanted to try was flying. As a dream that has existed since the birth of mankind, as long as it is human, it cannot be rejected by the dream of being able to fly to the sky by oneself. From ancient times to the present, all the powerful gods and demons that humans have longed for, even those powerful beings in film and television dramas, can all fly by themselves without exception. Sherlock considers himself a vulgar person, so naturally he cannot avoid vulgarity. For the first time in his life, Sherlock, as a bird, slowly spread his wings. It may be because Sherlock is a circle larger than an ordinary raven, and Sherlock's wingspan is far beyond that of an ordinary raven. As the wings spread, Sherlock looked at the shiny black feathers on his wings, and began to follow the instinct of the beast that came with the transformation, and began to flap his wings. As the wings flapped, Sherlock soared in the sky for the first time in his life, by relying on his own power, and made a clear chirping sound. Although Sherlock's cry sounded very clear to him, it still sounded like the crow's cry to the ears of the onlookers. Looking at Sherlock flying into the sky and merging into the thick black clouds, Lorna, who had been following Price, pulled Price's arm. Uncle Price, so now it is brother Sherlock who has turned into a bird and flown away. Chapter 314 Tony's Surgery, Part 1. After a night of storm, Sherlock's training ground returned to its previous appearance. The training ground was still full of the roar of male hormones, and the Avengers residential area was still a harmonious scene. The only difference was that Tony had a raven on his shoulder that was a circle larger than the other ravens. That's right, the raven on Tony's shoulder was none other than Sherlock himself. What? Why didn't Sherlock cancel the animagus transformation? Haha, Sherlock did think so. Hey, Sherlock himself didn't know why the animagus potion had that damn fixed entry. After all, according to the magic classification in Sherlock's library, animagus should be classified as ritual magic from ancient times. The so-called potion is actually a part of ritual magic. It should not be considered a potion. But the fact is so magical that this thing fermented by Sherlock's saliva is actually considered a potion. Fortunately, compared to ordinary potions, this thing does not have any strange side effects. It just makes Sherlock stay in the animagus state for 24 hours. In other words, Sherlock will not be able to actively remove the animagus transformation until the evening of tonight. Of course, these are minor problems for Sherlock, and Sherlock does not care much. The only thing that makes Sherlock feel strange is the entry that is hanging on his hair now. Death bird, entry locked, time limit 10 hours, 33 minutes and 56 seconds. That's right, Sherlock's transformation was locked into an entry called Death Bird, and this damn entry doesn't even have a damn explanation. Sherlock did not think that he had turned into those so-called magical animals, and he tried hard to see if he had any magical abilities. But unfortunately, he didn't. At least Sherlock has not discovered any magical abilities yet. Even when Charlotte had nothing to do last night, she carefully recalled all the books about magical animals that she had read in the library. There is no introduction about the death bird, as if it has never appeared. There are introductions to the so-called death bird in the real world, but most of them are myths that are made out of nothing and are not of reference value. So Sherlock finally decided to leave it alone for the time being. Anyway, as long as the entry is over, he can turn back to human form. Whether it is a magical beast or not will be revealed later. Even if it is really a magical beast, as the only person in the world who has mastered the transformation of the animagus of magical beasts, Sherlock feels that he is not at a loss. If this is placed in the world of Harry Potter, it is even more unique to Scorpion Baba, and he deserves a Merlin First Class medal to show his awesomeness. Of course, if you insist on saying that there is something magical about Sherlock's transformation, it is that Sherlock can actually understand the meaning of all the birds' calls after the transformation. It is precisely because of this that Sherlock has no feelings for the originally beautiful words "the beautiful morning sunshine is accompanied by the sound of birds." After all, only when you don't understand, you will feel that the bird song is unusually crisp and pleasant. After you can understand, Sherlock knows how dirty these seemingly harmless birds are. It can only be said that the early bird catches the worm, but at the same time, no one who wakes up early will not go crazy. Putting aside Sherlock's episode, there is another big thing in the training ground today, that is, Tony decided to repair the big hole in his chest through surgery because of the placement of the reactor. This is also one of the gifts Tony decided to give to Pepper. The reason why there has been no action is, on the one hand, because it was delayed by the team building arranged by Sherlock, and on the other hand, the whole Eagle Source family can't find a surgeon who can perform Tony's surgery this time. This is not a conjecture. Looking at the surgeons all over the world, if we talk about the ranking, then the surgery of the rabbit side must be ranked first. The huge population base of a rabbit directly determines that the surgical experience of the rabbit family's surgeons is far more than that of foreign countries, where the population is already sparse, and they are still committing suicide from time to time. The last time she traveled to the rabbit's house, Pepper asked A, B, C, and E to help contact the top thoracic surgeons, hoping to perform surgery on Tony, remove the tiny pieces from Tony's chest, and get Tony out of the reactor in his chest. Now there is news that the doctor arranged for Tony is ready and will set off for Eagle Source immediately. I don't know if it was because of Sherlock's transformation last night or because of Sherlock's babbling process after the transformation last night that touched Tony. Tony, who is extremely resistant to others touching his body, actually took the initiative to set the date for the surgery. When Tony announced the news at breakfast, everyone congratulated Tony, even Sherlock, who was still a bird. It's just that, because he is a bird, Sherlock can only make bad sounds, which made Tony's face darken. He said to Sherlock that if possible, you can turn into a human form before talking, otherwise it's too unlucky. Sherlock was speechless about Tony's complaints. But after all, he is his uncle, and although there are the world's top surgeons to perform the operation, no one dares to guarantee that the operation will be successful. Therefore, the first thing Sherlock did after returning to human form was to find Tony and Pepper, and said that he wanted to enter Tony's operating room as a last resort. Although Sherlock does not understand medicine, Sherlock can guarantee that, even if the operation fails, Sherlock can make Tony return to the appearance when the reactor was installed in his chest. Regardless of whether the operation is successful or not, Sherlock can definitely ensure that Tony can survive. Faced with Sherlock's statement, although Tony was not very willing, he could not resist Pepper's agreement, so he immediately began to discuss with the doctors. Although Dr. Wu, who came to perform the operation on Tony, did not understand why the patient insisted that Sherlock, a child with a non-medical background, be in the operating room, he thought that after all, this trip was a mission and a mission, to save the dying and the wounded, and finally agreed to Pepper's request. The only requirement is that Sherlock cannot delay the operation. Sherlock doesn't care about this. After all, if nothing happens, Sherlock would probably be playing games with the anesthesiologist the whole time. There is no need to perform magic in front of everyone, right? Chapter 315 Tony's Surgery, Part 2. Facts have proved that Sherlock's worries were completely unnecessary. Dr. Wu from Rabbit has impeccable surgical skills. Sherlock and the anesthesiologist played almost all the games during the operation. They played everything from Bakeo Garden to Sanway Bookstore, including King of Glory, League of Legends, Chicken Dinner, and Arc Zone. From playing Old Turtle to hanging Golden Hook. From Gobbong to chess. From flying chess to Monopoly. Sherlock and the anesthesiologist played fiercely in the corner of the operating room. They almost forgot all the two-player games that can be thought of in ancient and modern times. After 10 hours of surgery, Sherlock got an impressive record of 2 wins, 3 draws, and 52 losses. These 2 victories were won by Sherlock, who was very old, because he lost a lot when playing chess. He pretended to be thinking with his eyes closed, but in fact, he was crazy in his library with another spare mobile phone, and clicked on the human computer version of chess. As for the 3 draws, it was all thanks to Sherlock's gobbing skills that he had learned when he was playing with his friends in school in his previous life. Looking at his record of fighting like a war eagle, Sherlock's face was like a standard old man on the subway. Seeing Sherlock's expression, as if he had eaten shit, the anesthesiologist smiled slightly. The young man was still too naive. How could a cream boy like you compare to me who had been slacking off in the operating room for decades? Although Sherlock did not play any role in the operation, as an uncle, Tony was still very grateful to Sherlock for staying by his side. Tony was also very happy to get rid of the reactor in his chest, and he was enjoying the meticulous care of Pepper. What? Why didn't you ask Sherlock to use some magic potion to recover quickly? Nonsense. How can you enjoy the meticulous care of Pepper after you recover? That would be a big loss. So Tony thought of a bad idea. Before leaving the operating room, Tony had just woken up and asked Sherlock if there was a potion with a less strong effect. He didn't want to recover so quickly. If it really didn't work, he could accept a potion that had recovered and mixed it with some water. Don't let him recover so quickly. Sherlock couldn't help but put on a contemptuous expression towards Tony, who had just woken up, but Tony didn't care at all. When they got to the ward, Tony told Sherlock his understanding of the point of adding water when no one was around. 1000:1 exclamation point. My goodness, put a drop of potion in 1,000 drops of water? Are you really mixing potion with water? No, you mixed a little potion with water. Sherlock was shocked by Tony's understanding of the measurement unit of point, who was the first person on the scientific side. I don't understand, but I'm greatly shocked. Of course, as an uncle, Tony would not let Sherlock not understand for too long. After Pepper and the doctor understood the precautions after the operation and returned to the ward, Sherlock almost immediately understood the idea of Tony, the bad guy. My goodness, the eyes of the two were almost drawn. The eyes of Pepper looking at Tony were not only full of strong love, but also full of maternal love. Sherlock, who was stuffed with dog food, looked at the couple in front of him and couldn't think of how to scold them. In the end, he could only use some lame excuse of worrying that the potion would recover too quickly and affect the recovery of the wound to fool Pepper, and then threw down a bottle of healing potion with a little potion added to the water according to Tony's words, and left in a hurry. It's impossible not to leave. Her mother's mouth was stuffed with dog food. If she doesn't leave, she will get fat. Tony was discharged from the hospital very quickly, not much different from the situation in China. After about a week, Tony packed up and went home. After all, the hospital was convenient, and going home was definitely much better than staying in the hospital. It was just that it was hard for the other people in the community. Every time they saw Tony alone, everyone tacitly gave Tony, the damn bastard who was spreading dog food everywhere, a universal friendly gesture. Of course, when Sherlock returned home, apart from occasionally giving Tony some diluted magic potions, he became the gay guy again most of the time. But this time, Sherlock's gay way of wandering around had changed dramatically. Now in the training ground, you can often see a black raven with bloodshot eyes squatting on the back of a cat with 2 tails. You know what? After becoming an animal, the way you see the world has changed. The training ground that was once so familiar seems to have become a place you have never seen before. Sherlock has experienced all the small corners that were usually invisible to humans after turning into small animals. So far, Sherlock has found at least 5 gatherings of small animals in his own training ground. That gathering scene looks like a bar in the Eagle Source in Sherlock's opinion. It is also difficult for these small animals to find these things that can be used as commodities among the messy things that humans don't want. In short, it gives people a very magical feeling, a bit like the visual sense of Disney's crazy Zootopia. Of course, Sherlock will not always be a bird. After all, he still has to pay for everyone's meals. Maybe everyone's tastes have been spoiled during the last team building in Shanghai and LS. Although occasionally they will eat some traditional Western food such as steak and fries or pizza, most of the time, everyone still prefers the pure Chinese food made by Sherlock. Note that it must be authentic Chinese food. Few people want to eat the so-called Chinese food in the Western style. When Sherlock first crossed over, he actually tried the so-called local Chinese food out of curiosity. The taste, how can I say, is unforgettable. Not to mention the names of the dishes that Sherlock had never heard of in his previous life on the rabbit side, such as General Tso's chicken. The taste is sweet and sour, and Sherlock is really not interested in these things. Of course, after eating more, Sherlock also understood why Chinese food can despise foreign food, because Chinese food is processed ingredients, and the size of the ingredients is very easy to eat. And those Western things, such as steak, if you don't have a knife and fork, it will be too hideous to eat. Everyone's life is plain and happy. Sherlock even thought that such a life can last for a long time, or even never end. But God will never let Sherlock be peaceful. Just a few days later, when Sherlock was standing on the back of his little coal bowl and playing gay, a colorful light suddenly fell from the sky. Chapter 316. Little Coal Ball's Extraordinary Identity? That's right, it was Asgard's rainbow bridge that fell from the sky. Sherlock didn't even react before he and his little coal ball were teleported to Heimdall in a daze. At the entrance of the rainbow bridge, Thor stood behind Heimdall and looked at the direction of the rainbow bridge with expectation. When a cat with two tails and a raven standing on the cat's back came out, Thor seemed to have seen a ghost. Do you know what it means to jump 3 feet high? Sherlock saw it with his own eyes this time. The moment Sherlock and his little coal ball appeared at the gate of the rainbow bridge, Thor seemed to have seen something very scary and really jumped more than 3 feet high. Before Sherlock could react, the Meow Hammer flew out of the palace of Asgard and came to Thor's hand in an instant. Thor immediately entered a fighting state and stared at the bird and cat on Sherlock's side. Although Heimdall on the other side was not as nervous as Thor and did not look like he was about to fight, he also looked at the bird and cat that appeared at the entrance of the rainbow bridge with a vigilant look. Looking at the two nervous people, Sherlock felt a touch of happiness for the first time. You always summon me for no reason. Now you are afraid because you summoned me wrong this time. Damn it, I finally fought back against that old bastard Thor. Sherlock glanced at the two nervous people with his scholar eyes, and then he changed back to his original appearance. Thor watched Sherlock turn from a bird into a person, but he did not show the surprised expression that Sherlock imagined. He still stared at Sherlock in a defensive posture, well, or stared at the little coal ball at Sherlock's feet. Of course, the little coal ball couldn't stand Thor. Since he appeared in Asgard, he kept breathing at Thor and Heimdall. Finally, Sherlock couldn't stand it anymore. He picked up the small coal ball and put it in his arms. In the horrified eyes of Thor and Heimdall, he stroked the small coal ball in his arms. Seeing that the small coal ball was no longer hostile to Thor and Heimdall, he put the small coal ball on his head. The small coal ball seemed to be too lazy to pay attention to the two strong men on the opposite side. When Sherlock stroked it, it made a happy little snoring sound. When Sherlock put the small coal ball on the top of his head, it turned into liquid and spread out on the top of Sherlock's head like a cat pancake. Looking at Thor and Heimdall who were still on guard, Sherlock looked at the two people on the opposite side with an expression of looking at a fool. After a while, the two did not relax. Finally, Sherlock couldn't help but speak. I say, what's wrong with you two? Why do you look like you are facing a great enemy? Hearing Sherlock's calm tone, Thor's voice trembled a little. While holding the hammer in his hand, he waved to Sherlock tremblingly. Sherlock, my brother, hurry up and put that thing on your head down. Hurry up. It will kill you. Hearing Thor's nervous look, Sherlock rolled his eyes unhappily, scratched the chin of the little coal ball that was spread out like a cat cake on the top of his head with his index finger, and listened to the snoring of the little coal ball before complaining to Thor. Don't worry, it's just a little cat on Earth, not a human devourer. I checked it out. You don't have to be so nervous. It would have been better if Sherlock didn't say it. After he finished speaking, Thor's eyes almost popped out, especially when he saw Sherlock scratching the kitten's chin and the kitten purred comfortably. Thor seemed to have seen a miracle that he would never believe in his life, and his voice was a little trembling as he asked, "Brother, tell me the truth. Do you really not have any side jobs or hidden identities?" Hearing Thor's words, Sherlock rolled his eyes unhappily and directly responded with a wave of criticism. "What's the point of hiding your identity? Tell me what's going on with you. Tell me why you're looking for me. Stop looking for trouble." Thor seemed to sense Sherlock's impatience. He glanced at Sherlock, then looked at the coal ball on Sherlock's head, took a deep breath, and tried to calm himself down. After a while, Thor gradually let go of his desperate look and gradually returned to normal. Although he looked normal on the surface, Heimdall, who was standing next to Thor, could still see that Thor's muscles were actually tense. "Did you know? The thing on top of your head is not a real kitten, nor is it a element devourer. It is a thing that is more terrifying than a element devourer, and there are legends about it throughout the universe. Legend has it that if there is a place where a massacre or disaster is about to happen, well, in short, when there will be a large number of casualties, this little guy will appear there and will quietly disappear afterwards. It's not that no one wants to catch this little guy to find out, but without exception, anyone who gets close to this little guy will lose their life, and their death is extremely miserable. So far, no one in the entire universe can truly own the little thing on top of your head. Everyone says that it is the embodiment of death, the real pet of the god of death, and it is an existence that helps the god of death relives." Listening to Thor's introduction to the little guy on top of his head, Sherlock exclaimed, "What a guy." Hearing this, he picked up the little coal ball on the top of his head and held it in front of him to observe it. Seeing his little coal ball being picked up and its body drooping like a cat, Sherlock looked at the little cat in front of him and then looked at Thor, who was terrified not far away. "Good man, are you sure this silly, soft little thing is the symbol of death in your mouth? Is this thing the pet of the god of death in your mouth? Don't be kidding. Why would the god of death keep this thing? Is it for cuteness?" Sherlock didn't believe a word of Thor's statement and rolled his eyes at Thor in annoyance. In the horrified eyes of Thor and Heimdall, he buried his face in the belly of the little coal ball and took a deep breath. It tastes right." After taking a breath of the cat, Sherlock seemed to have regained his spirit and threw the confused little coal ball on his head again, and then turned to Thor and Heimdall, who were standing not far away. "Come on, stop talking nonsense. Tell me, what do you want me for again?" Chapter 317. The unforgivable curse strengthened to an epic level. Seeing Sherlock sucking the absolutely dangerous beast in their eyes like a cat, Thor's eyelids almost popped out, and he shook his head. Especially after Sherlock finished sucking, he still had an expression of "Really? I don't believe it. If you have anything to say, please fart." Thor was even more speechless. For a moment, Thor's whole person had an expression of wanting to say something, but not being able to say it. However, as Sherlock's good buddy, Thor decided to persuade his good brother again. After all, this little thing has a good reputation. In Thor's opinion, according to Sherlock's suicidal look, his small body is not enough to kill the thing he just sucked. However, just when Thor wanted to speak, Odin's voice came from the Asgard palace on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge. "Thor, bring your friends over." Obviously Odin is a million miles away from the three people, but Odin's voice seems to be ringing in their ears. Sherlock didn't care. After all, in terms of strength, Odin was a godlike strong man, and in terms of seniority, he was his friend's father. Whether from the perspective of respecting the strong, or respecting the elders, since Odin had spoken, Sherlock should go there. But it was obvious that Thor didn't think so. The difference between the two people's images on the Rainbow Bridge was so big. Sherlock walked towards the Asgard palace at the end of the Rainbow Bridge with a small coal ball on his head and a square step, looking like he was traveling and playing in the mountains and rivers. And Thor, who was following behind Sherlock, looked like a devil entering the village. He carefully stared at the small coal ball on Sherlock's head that had spread into liquid, and the meow hammer in his hand was always ready to go. Just looking at the figures of the two people, if you didn't know, you would think Sherlock was the Prince of Asgard. Fortunately, there weren't many people he met along the way, and little Coldball didn't bother to pay attention to the nervous big golden retriever behind him. He lay on Sherlock's head and followed Sherlock into the Palace of Asgard. The Palace of Asgard was no different from the last time Sherlock came. Odin sat on the throne with his Spear of Eternity and watched the two people coming in. He watched Sherlock walk in and bow slightly to him, and he was very calm the whole time. Then he looked at his son, who looked so nervous, as if he was a Japanese soldier who had to guard against the attack of the gorillas. When he entered the village, Odin couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Damn, who did this silly kid take after? Of course, Sherlock didn't know Odin's psychological activities. He still bowed slightly to Odin and asked according to the etiquette he had when the Ancient One brought him here last time. Respected godly Odin, what exactly did you ask me to come here for? Hearing Sherlock's question, Odin shifted his attention from his silly son to the cold ball on Sherlock's head and then said to Sherlock, "My child, the moment you arrived in the palace, I felt the strong breath of the power of death on you. That's why I asked you to come here, wanting to know what happened. After all, you are Thor's friend, right?" It would have been better if Odin didn't say anything. After he finished speaking, Sherlock was stunned for a moment. The power of death. Sherlock didn't directly answer Odin's question about what happened, but asked a question that interested him. Yes, the breath of the power of death, but the breath on you is not complete. I can feel it. But it is also the real power of death, and even your power has surpassed a real god. To reach a power that is close to the rules, I can feel that once you complete this power, you can almost instantly surpass that god and kill everything in the world, including that god. As Odin's voice fell, Sherlock almost immediately thought of his unfinished spell of eating big melons under the influence of the obscure entry. Until now, Sherlock can clearly remember the unspeakable fear. This time, Sherlock has found the source. Good guy. Sherlock never thought that his killing curse would be epically strengthened in the Marvel world. You know, in the HP world, the killing curse is the most vicious and powerful black magic that no spell can stop. But family members know their own business. The killing curse is indeed unstoppable by any spell, but the armor-piercing ability of this thing is basically the same as that of an object after a shiver. It can't be said that there is none. That is really absolutely none. Any solid object can stop the progress of the killing curse. Therefore, in HP magic, most people will use transfiguration or simply rely on their own body movements to avoid the frightening green light. But now, my goodness, listen to what Odin told Sherlock. Kill everything. This sentence is really powerful. You know, if it is really as Odin said, then even if facing the captain's shield, Sherlock can only cast 2 spells at most. The first one kills the shield, and the second one kills the captain. This is very scary. You know, the vibranium of the captain's shield can be said to be one of the top metals in the Marvel world. And the most important thing is the erosion of the mind by the unforgivable curse. You know, the few torture spells at the beginning almost made Sherlock's sanity return to 0. What if it is this epic enhanced killing curse? No one can refuse this feeling of controlling the life and death of all things in the world. Sherlock couldn't even imagine what the whole earth would have to pay to wake him up if he hadn't woken up at the beginning and really turned into a madman who was like Voldemort and was eating melons everywhere. And the most important thing was the god in Odin's mouth. Although this god had never appeared in the movie, Sherlock also knew that this so-called god should be the goddess of death in the Celestial clan in the comics. After all, this is the real world, not just a movie. The fact that it didn't appear in the movie doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in the real world. Another point is that the killing curse has been epically strengthened. The torture curse has been experimented with by himself. And what about the Imperious curse? You have to know that in Marvel's worldview, the soul is the hard currency between the real big guys. This thing is food, the source of power, and the bargaining chip for trading. Even the Infinity Stones have a separate gem for the soul. You can imagine how important the soul is. Since the soul is so important, will the Imperious curse, which can completely control the soul, be epically strengthened like the killing curse? At this moment, Sherlock admitted that he was beginning to panic. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318, The Little Cold Ball is actually a devouring beast. Looking at Sherlock's face gradually soaked with cold sweat, Odin wanted to say something, but finally sighed helplessly. After all, in Odin's view, Sherlock has always been a disciple of the Ancient One. There are some things that he cannot point out directly. What he said just now is enough. Looking at the somewhat panicked Sherlock, Odin finally comforted him. Don't worry, that god is not a person who cares about every little thing, and the breath on your body is not complete. As long as you don't appear in front of her, he will not find you. After hearing Odin's words, Sherlock reluctantly breathed a sigh of relief. Sherlock really didn't want to confront those people in the god group at all, especially the most mysterious goddess of death. Sherlock was really a little scared. But before Sherlock could completely put his mind at ease, a soft meow came from the top of Sherlock's head. If it were normal, Sherlock would have hugged the little cold ball on the top of his head in his arms, making a strange laugh, and yelling, "Little slut, you seduced me first." Then he held the little cold ball in his arms, and ravaged it until the little cold ball couldn't stand the mess of its fur being rubbed by Sherlock, and jumped out of Sherlock's arms. But now, when the little cold ball cried, Sherlock's mind was full of what Thor had just said to him. This guy is the pet of the god of death. The pet of the god of death. Pet. Sherlock felt a little uncomfortable. Is this considered a crime before his husband's eyes? Not only did he steal someone's authority, but he also stole someone's pet. Seeing Sherlock's face immediately become colorful after the little cold ball cried, how could Odin, who was already old and shrewd, not know what Sherlock was thinking? He waved his hand at Sherlock with a smile on his face and continued. If nothing unexpected happens, you should have heard Thor say that the thing on your head is the pet of the god of death or something. After hearing Odin's words, Sherlock nodded hurriedly. After all, judging from Odin's reaction, it seemed that his so-called husband's crime could still be saved. Seeing Sherlock's panic, Odin's smile became more obvious, and then he said to Sherlock, "Don't worry, these are just rumors. The real identity of this little guy is actually just a meat devourer." It would have been better if Odin didn't say it. After Odin finished speaking, Sherlock and Thor refuted Odin's words almost in unison. Impossible. I checked it. Impossible. I know meat devourers. Sherlock said he checked it, and Thor said he knew it. Both of them were equally surprised. After all, this situation is as outrageous as if you adopted a stray fat orange in the real world, and then found that this fat orange was really a meat devourer. Facing the two's rebuttal, Odin was not angry. It seemed that he sensed that his time was coming, and wanted to be more tolerant to the children. Odin smiled more kindly, and explained to the two. Of course you can't recognize that this is a devourer, because this kind of devourer is the result of artificial breeding. To Sherlock and Thor thought of countless possibilities, but they didn't expect that it would be such a result. Odin was not stingy with such a big melon of the universe level, and told them like telling a story to a child. In fact, the whole story is very simple. Just like the World War on Earth, there was a large-scale melee between the universe and the Only. Since it was a war, the devourer, which can almost devour everything, was naturally noticed by those war maniacs. As long as it was modified, this thing would be a surefire killer when it was put on the battlefield. No one could refuse such a weapon. So a group of crazy scientists captured a batch of devourers and began to experiment. But unfortunately, they thought well, but the results were not perfect. Until the end of the war, this weapon-level devourer war machine had not been successfully tested. In addition, after the war ended, this group of people directly abandoned the devourer research institute, leaving those poor devourers to fend for themselves. It may be due to the previous experiments or some other reasons. Although this group of people gave up the laboratory, they accidentally gave birth to two devourer variants among the experimental subjects. This type of mutated devourer is not so concerned about food. Compared with food, they prefer souls. That's right, the favorite food of this mutated devourer is souls. They don't have the terrible tentacles of other UN devourers, but they unexpectedly have the ability to devour souls, and their tails have become two, and even their attack methods are attacks on souls. Compared with ordinary UN devourers, the number of this type of mutated UN devourer is even rarer, and coupled with their super cosmic survival ability, it is almost rare to see this type of UN devourer in the entire universe. In addition, they often appear near various massacres or natural disasters to find food, and gradually become the pets of the god of death and the harvesters of souls passed down by word of mouth. Only the leaders of several warring forces at that time knew about this matter. After all, weapons from research and development to equipment require time and money, and Odin was actually one of the investors at the time. Of course, Odin would definitely not tell Sherlock and Thor about this matter. No one expected that the unintentional act at the time would create the notorious reputation of the little guy on Sherlock's head. It can only be said that fate is really wonderful. As for why the little guy likes Sherlock so much, it is actually very simple, because the power that suddenly appeared on Sherlock represents death. For this mutated metamorphosis beast, this power is the same as catnip for Professor McGonagall. It can only make people sink again and again, shouting that they can't quit, and can't quit at all. Thor and Sherlock were stunned by Odin's story. They didn't expect the little guy's life experience to be so dramatic. It can only be said that war can really distort everything. This group of crazy assholes can actually attack the metamorphosis beast with a cute meow appearance. It's unheard of. As a cat lover, Sherlock condemned this. As Odin's story came to an end, Odin couldn't hide a look of fatigue on his face. He waved to Thor and said, "Thor, take your friend back and entertain your friend. You have troubled your friend more than once." As Odin spoke, Sherlock and Thor bowed slightly to Odin and then left the room in unison. Sherlock held the little coal ball in front of him as soon as he came out. Looking at the clear and stupid eyes of his little coal ball, Sherlock couldn't help it in the end. He buried his face in the little coal ball's belly and took a deep breath while the little coal ball was meowing. Well, it tastes right. This time it's the taste of the devourer. I, Sherlock, also masturbated the devourer. But neither Sherlock nor Thor, or even Odin, knew that the birth of this mutant devourer was actually reborn from death. The soul is not only the food of this little guy, but also the toy of this little guy. In other words, this little guy is really inextricably linked to death. After all, no one knows whether death is a cat lover, and who can really refuse a cute little kitty? Chapter 319. The characteristic of Asgard is the bathhouse. Maybe because he felt bad about using the Rainbow Bridge to force Sherlock to come several times, or maybe because Thor's father had said so, Thor really didn't pull Sherlock to talk about his own things at the first time. Instead, he pulled Sherlock away from Odin's palace in a mysterious way. After the two of them really left Odin's palace, Thor looked at Sherlock with a wretched face and said, "My father is right. You have worked hard all the time. Let's go and experience the characteristics of Asgard." Looking at Thor's wretched expression, Sherlock really doubted whether Thor's so-called characteristics were serious or not. But Sherlock didn't say anything. After all, Sherlock was also very curious about Thor's so-called characteristics. Although Sherlock has come to Asgard more than once, in fact, apart from the few times when Thor had something to talk to Sherlock at the gate of the Rainbow Bridge, Sherlock has actually only stepped into Asgard once. It was the time when Ancient One brought Sherlock to question the crime, but Sherlock didn't really say that he was going to learn about Asgard. In the first half of that trip to Asgard, Sherlock stayed in the library and studied like crazy. After finally leaving the library, Sherlock went back to his life of going from room to canteen to training ground. At the end, Sherlock went to the market in Asgard to buy some souvenirs. It's not like he knew Asgard at all. After all, no one can say that they know a place just by going shopping there once, right? Sherlock was really interested in the so-called features of Asgard mentioned by Thor. After Thor took Sherlock out of the palace through the gate, he took Sherlock to turn left and right in various alleys. The more he walked, the more Sherlock felt something was wrong. After all, why would a normal place need to be opened in such a secret place? Sherlock began to plan in his head how he should refuse and show a righteous look, and then be forced by Thor to save those young ladies, because he could not beat Thor. But what Sherlock never expected was that after a period of twists and turns, Thor took Sherlock to his mother's bathhouse. That's right, it was the bathhouse that can be seen everywhere in the north. But to be honest, Sherlock was really more excited to see the bathhouse than to see the young ladies. You know, in the so-called privacy-oriented environment of Yin Jiang's home, Sherlock has never seen the human skin polishing engineer that he often saw before the crossing. Well, that is, the bathmaster commonly known as the heir. Let alone her mother's bathmaster. Sherlock has never seen his mother's bathmaster. God knows how uncomfortable Sherlock was when he first crossed over. To be honest, this is because Sherlock could still take a bath at home and slowly got used to it and didn't think about this thing. Otherwise Sherlock would be uncomfortable to death. Now Sherlock couldn't believe that Thor's sneaky appearance and taking Sherlock through the streets and alleys as if he had committed a crime must be a bathhouse. Looking at the door of the bathhouse that was very familiar, Sherlock looked at Thor with excitement and asked his soul-searching question. I say, dear Mr. Thor, I see you are so sneaky, as if you can't stand the light. The place you brought me to is a bathhouse. Is it necessary to be so sneaky just now? After Sherlock finished speaking, Thor looked at Sherlock and felt that he was not feeling well. His eyes were wide open, staring at Sherlock, and asked with a confused face, you actually know the bathhouse? No, how did you know? I have never seen a bathhouse in Midgard. How did you know? Looking at Thor's long hair and short knowledge, Sherlock rolled his eyes and asked unhappily, don't worry about it. I just want to ask you if you need to be sneaky when taking a bath. Seeing Sherlock's appearance, Thor rolled his eyes in annoyance and said, isn't this to give you a sense of ritual and mystery? How could I know that you actually know the characteristics of Asgard? How about I take you to another place? After hearing Thor's words, Sherlock's eyes were almost raised from his eyes. He could only say, husky among dogs, Thor among people. This sentence is absolutely correct. However, after hearing Thor's proposal to change a place, Sherlock still rejected Thor's proposal to change a place without hesitation. Just kidding. Today I, Sherlock, want to have a good bath and rub to my heart's content. Even the gods are not useful here, I said. Under Thor's stunned gaze, Sherlock took the cards, changed his shoes, changed his clothes, and walked towards the bathing area while whistling. Originally, Sherlock thought that the little coal ball on his head might be a little repulsive to water. After all, although the little coal ball looked like a cute kitten, kittens don't like water. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that the little coal ball was even more excited than Sherlock. He patted Sherlock with his soft pink paw pads to stop him all the way, as if he couldn't wait to take a bath. Sherlock naturally ignored Thor, who was standing in the cabinet and whispering to comfort the meow meow hammer. He rushed to the bathing area excitedly with his hand cards and towel. When Sherlock really came to the bathing area, he was stunned by the bathing area in front of him. Although they are all bathhouses, the bathhouse in Asgard is obviously different from the northern bathhouse before Sherlock crossed over, and the most obvious thing is that the environment and layout of this bathhouse looked like a combination of ancient Roman baths and Turkish baths. And for some unknown reason, there were not many people in the bathhouse. Under the steam, even southerners who had never been to a bathhouse could take a bath in the pool calmly. Sherlock was still in shock, but it was obvious that the little coal ball on Sherlock's head couldn't wait any longer. It jumped off Sherlock's head, then quickly ran to a pool and tested the water temperature with its little paws. After feeling that the water temperature was right, the little coal ball used its front two paws to grab the edge of the pool and carefully put its body into the water. Well, according to the height of the little coal ball, even if the little coal ball stood up, it would definitely not be able to reach the ground, but this did not prevent the little coal ball from taking a bath. Before Sherlock could recover, the little coal ball was already floating comfortably in the pool with its belly facing up, and did not forget to make a comfortable meow. Chapter 320, Thor, you're finally in my hands. It was not until the small coal balls made a comfortable snoring sound in the pool that Sherlock was awakened by Sol, who came later. Looking at the bathhouse in front of him, Sherlock was also full of emotion. Tall Roman columns, golden lion heads that constantly spit out hot water, clear and steaming pools, Turkish kangs made of hot marble, and the master of the bathhouse was busy on the side. Everything confirmed one thing: this is definitely Sherlock's dream love haul. No one else. Sherlock followed Sol and brought the small coal balls that had been soaked in the pool. You really don't have to say, Sol's muscles are really good looking. What about that size? Sherlock doesn't know whether he can attract the opposite sex, but he can definitely attract the same sex. It can only be said that excessive fitness is really not good. This is because Sol fell in Europe and the United States. Otherwise, according to Sol's size for participating in bodybuilding competitions, it is estimated that sweet love may be far away from Sol. Of course, gays are another matter. When Sherlock really sat in the hot water, he felt like he was alive again. You know what? I haven't taken a bath for a long time. It feels so good to take a bath every now and then. Ignoring Thor's hesitation, Sherlock took a purple clay teapot from the library, some poor tea bought on his last trip, and used magic to add some hot water. He calmly brewed tea at the edge of the pool. Drinking tea while taking a bath was definitely Sherlock's favorite leisure activity when he was on vacation, before he traveled through time. It was because he didn't have the conditions after traveling through time. Otherwise Sherlock would never give up such a hobby. But since Thor was the one who invited him to take a bath this time, looking at Thor who was curious about him making tea, Sherlock didn't lose sight of the other. He took out a teacup from his library and poured a cup for Thor. Out of curiosity, Thor took Sherlock's teacup and drank a sip of the poor tea Sherlock brewed, and then immediately criticized Sherlock's pour. He said bitter tree leaves, unpalatable and other comments, which made Sherlock angry, and scolded Thor that wild boars could not eat fine bran. He turned around and took out a floating plate that could float on the water. He put a dish of side dishes and a bottle of medical alcohol on it, and pushed it in front of Thor with the teacup that Thor had just used. This time Thor finally felt that it was right. He leaned comfortably in the pool, took a sip of wine and a bite of side dishes from time to time, and sighed that Sherlock, a foreigner, could enjoy it more than him, a local. Looking at Thor, who looked like a salted fish who didn't fight with the world, Sherlock rolled his eyes in anger and kept complaining about Thor in his heart. You can enjoy it like this. If you go to the northeast bathing of Rabbit, wouldn't you be so happy? Of course, although Sherlock didn't say anything on the surface, he still looked at this old-fashioned man with contempt, and then he asked, "Okay, stop talking nonsense. Tell me what you want first. Let's make it clear first. Even if you invite me to take a bath, I won't help if I can't do it." After hearing Sherlock's words, Thor acted immediately. He didn't just bring Sherlock to enjoy himself, but also wanted to ask Sherlock for help. He put on a flattering smile on his face and began to tell Sherlock what happened. In fact, the process of the matter is very simple. Didn't Thor ask Sherlock to send a letter to Jane last time? But Thor also asked Heimdall to keep an eye on where the letter was sent, so as to know Jane's address. Facts have proved that Heimdall is still very reliable, and he really let Thor know Jane's address. Then the two people who were in a long-distance relationship began to send letters to each other using the Rainbow Bridge. Yes, you heard it right. They used the Rainbow Bridge to send letters to each other. When Sherlock heard this, he was stunned. The main gun of Asgard was actually used by this love-brained golden retriever to send love letters. Sherlock silently felt that the Rainbow Bridge was not worth it. Everything was fine, but for some reason, Jane began to ignore Thor recently. Thor even sent several letters to Jane, but could not receive Jane's reply. Later, Jane simply disappeared. Yes, she disappeared, and even Heimdall could not find her location. After all, Heimdall is not omnipotent. He can only help Thor to keep an eye on Jane's whereabouts. Heimdall is to keep an eye on the 9 realms. But even if Heimdall is watching, it is useless. People are not the letters sent by Thor. It is actually very simple to get rid of Heimdall's attention. Just hide in the subway. Even if Heimdall is powerful, he can't calculate when and where you will leave the station, right? Sherlock rolled his eyes when he heard this. Now Thor is not only a love-brained golden retriever, but has evolved into a love-brained straight man golden retriever. Why else could he ignore you? First you left without saying goodbye, and then you finally communicated with each other, but you used the Rainbow Bridge to contact unilaterally. If it was Sherlock, he would have ignored you a long time ago. To put it simply, it was actually a quarrel between the couple, and Thor's idea was also very simple. He wanted to ask Sherlock to see if he could find Jane, to help him say a good word in front of Jane, and to explain the current situation, so that Jane would pay attention to him. Sherlock was speechless about Thor's request. For some reason, Sherlock always felt that he seemed to have become a part of some strange play between Jane and Thor. Shaking his head vigorously, Sherlock quickly threw out the yellow waste in his mind, looked at Thor opposite, and thought about the several cars he had scrapped because of this guy. He thought about the last time when he helped to deliver a love letter to this guy. He was pinned to the ground twice in front of Heimdall because of his love for the car. At this moment, Sherlock finally had a ferocious smile on his face. Good fellow, Thor, you bastard finally fell into my hands. Today, if I don't blackmail you until you have nothing left, then you will be stripped clean today. Sherlock, who was possessed by Zhu Jiang, decisively put the teacup in his hand on the edge of the pool and immediately sat in the pool with a majestic look. He looked at Thor beside him with an embarrassed expression and said in a very arrogant tone, "Ahem, little Thor, it's not impossible in principle." Chapter 321 Return Home. Asgard is famous for its muscular brains. Sherlock's little trick of "in principle, it's okay, but in fact, it's not okay, in principle, it's okay" made Thor stunned. After all, before Sherlock traveled through time, he went to Shandong to study for the 8th level of the SA, in order to take the civil service exam, and realize his ideal ambition of serving the motherland. Although he failed in the end, his foundation was still there. Although Thor is the royal family of Asgard and the first heir, if it comes to ZZ, that guy probably can't stand Sherlock's tricks, even if his father comes. Anyway, Sherlock and Thor are very satisfied with the final result. In Thor's opinion, he just paid a little useless money, and Sherlock can help him solve his lifelong event. And Sherlock thinks that he has also made a lot of profits. At least he doesn't have to worry about things like taking a bath in the future. That's right, Sherlock's condition is to give him all the decoration materials of the same bathhouse. Thor didn't hesitate, and the two happily reached a consensus on cooperation. Then the two of them soaked happily for a while, talked about some cosmic gossip, and then Sherlock and Thor went to the human skin polishing master to polish themselves. After going through all the procedures, Sherlock walked out of the bathhouse with ease, and was taken by Thor to the palace on the main road. He arranged a room, and told Sherlock to wait for one night. He would be able to get the materials Sherlock wanted tomorrow. Sherlock, who was so soft from the bath, naturally did not refuse. After all, there is nothing more comfortable than taking a nap with fatigue after taking a bath. After watching Thor leave, Sherlock looked at his knees, that were almost reflecting light, and felt the long-lost refreshment on his body. He happily took out a bottle of ice milk from the library, drank it, and then lay on the bed to sleep. If there is anything unsatisfactory about this bathhouse trip, it is that this bathhouse does not have cupping and foot massage services. But it is understandable. If the bathhouse in Asgard also has the services of cupping and foot massage like the rabbit, then Sherlock would really doubt the existence of the mysterious oriental power. Early the next morning, Thor took Sherlock to an open space in front of the palace. As the Prince of Asgard, Thor could mobilize a huge amount of resources. It was not difficult for Thor to get the decoration materials for a bathhouse in one night. Sherlock was not polite. With a wave of his hand, the decoration materials that almost filled the entire open space disappeared without a trace in an instant. It was unknown how many times they were reduced and appeared in Sherlock's library. Seeing Sherlock's move, Thor felt unwell and even looked at Sherlock standing beside him with some resentment. "Good fellow, you mages are really convenient. I moved all these things last night." Hearing Thor's complaints, Sherlock laughed unceremoniously. Out of respect for the transaction between the two, Thor could only look at Sherlock with gritted teeth in the face of Sherlock's crazy ridicule. After all, he had paid the balance on his side, but Sherlock hadn't done anything yet. Thor, who had transformed into boiling sheep, was eagerly waiting for Sherlock to help him solve the problem that made his beautiful sheep Jane angry. Naturally, he would not press Sherlock to the ground like before. It can only be said that Thor is also making progress, but this progress has nothing to do with Sherlock. As a good brother, Sherlock is definitely the most arrogant one among all people when he laughs, but when it comes to helping, Sherlock is really helping. As for Thor's progress, well, at most he has evolved from a husky to a golden retriever. It can only be said that Odin's education path is still a long way to go. After such a long time, Thor has not yet gotten rid of the identity of a dog. While laughing wildly and greeting Thor, Sherlock stepped onto the rainbow bridge with his little Cole in his arms and walked towards the gate of the rainbow bridge. Thor was left behind Sherlock's arrogant figure, gritting his teeth and looking at Sherlock. The expressions of the two just now seemed to have said everything, but it seemed that they said nothing. Anyway, the two brothers understood each other's meaning. Sherlock, do you have something else to ask me? Are you still arrogant? Come on, press me like last time. Thor, I'm not angry, my good buddy, this is a rebellious son, It should be said that Sherlock accidentally let Thor experience the feeling of Odin looking at Thor. It must be said that fate is still very magical. With the rainbow bridge falling from the sky, Sherlock once again returned to his familiar training ground. It must be said that this time on the trip to Asgard, Sherlock finally did not come back with a belly of anger. Even in Sherlock's opinion, this time's harvest is second only to the time when Ancient One took him to Asgard. After returning, Sherlock did not go directly to Gianurshi, but returned to his home first. After all, gold and silver lumps are not as good as his own grass lumps. Although the palace of Asgard is really comfortable and luxurious, Sherlock just feels that it is not as comfortable as his own house. Sherlock decided to take a rest first. After all, strictly speaking, Sherlock has also come on an interstellar journey this time. Of course, he would not forget to arrange his own Asgard-style bathroom. When he returned home, Sherlock first used his authority to call Tony's steel construction team, handed all the materials to those steel armors, and then ran back to his house in a hurry. Taking out his wand in his bathroom, Sherlock began to desperately cast the so-called traceless expansion spell, and then did not forget to permanently fix his expanded bathroom. After dealing with the site issues, Sherlock took a simple shower and then called the steel construction team to start working on the site. Seeing a large group of steel armors carrying materials in and out of his house, Sherlock could even imagine the wonderful life in the future. Of course, Sherlock's high-profile actions could not be hidden from other people in the training ground, but the magical thing was that no one, from Tony to the two lollies, asked Sherlock what he was doing. What Sherlock didn't know was that since he started to decorate his luxurious bathroom, this group of people in the training ground began to circulate Sherlock's house keys privately. How does the saying go? If the neighbor hoards food, I hoard guns, and the neighbor is my granary. Facing this group of bastards who have received American education since childhood, Sherlock is still too naive. Chapter 322 Jane and Sherlock. As for Sherlock's bathroom renovation, Sherlock naturally couldn't stay at home. After all, even if he could tolerate the clanking sound of the renovation, he couldn't stand the dust everywhere. After Sherlock handed the design drawings brought by Thor to Jarvis, who controlled the iron armor, he said hello to Tony and others, and then turned around and left his home with full expectations. He was still fantasizing that he could enjoy his own luxurious bathroom in his home when he came back. After finding a quiet place, Sherlock calmly took out his mobile phone and called Jane. The call was quickly connected. Jane on the other end of the phone was not like a girlfriend who was angry as Sherlock imagined. She was harder to press than a pig during the Chinese New Year. Instead, she talked to Sherlock about family matters in a relaxed tone. During the whole process, neither of them mentioned Thor's silly big golden retriever. After a while, Sherlock began to ask where Jane was now. The answer he got shocked Sherlock. Jane was still in Europe. Not only in Europe, Jane has also become a special consultant for SHIELD. After listening to Jane's explanation, Sherlock was completely dumbfounded. SHIELD. Didn't he disband that thing? Even the two senior agents of SHIELD, Black Widow and Hawkeye, are now at home. Not only are they at home, but they are also living very comfortably. Black Widow swims and exercises all day and works as a teacher. Her life is comfortable and chic. Hawkeye is a super dad who keeps feeding his children. He even uses his own archery skills to feed his children. God knows how shocked Sherlock was when he saw Hawkeye make a bottle arrow and actually use it. How can there be such a thing as SHIELD? Facing Sherlock's doubts, Jane did not hide it and explained it to Sherlock openly. Through Jane's explanation, Sherlock finally understood what this so-called SHIELD was. That's right, it's Marvel's spin-off TV series, The S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The unlucky Coulson was eventually tricked by the black salted egg, who was black on the outside but even darker on the inside, and became the so-called director of S.H.I.E.L.D. However, compared to the S.H.I.E.L.D., when the black salted egg was there, the current S.H.I.E.L.D. is no longer as powerful as before. It mainly helps the government deal with some mysterious things and some superpowered people, but it does not have the official attributes of the past. To put it simply, the current S.H.I.E.L.D. is like the so-called exorcists you have seen. The government pays money and hires S.H.I.E.L.D. to solve all things that seem supernatural and mysterious, as well as some things about superpowered people. The entire organization has changed from an official organization to a private organization, but compared to other private organizations, the so-called S.H.I.E.L.D. led by Coulson is one level higher than other private organizations in terms of logistics and technical reserves. Therefore, there is no shortage of orders, especially in Europe. After all, the Eagle Source has the Avengers sitting on the side, and the Rabbit side has the mysterious Eastern power to bless it. The only market for S.H.I.E.L.D. is some business in Europe and Africa. Sherlock is still full of emotion about this. After all, when watching TV series, the TV series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was still one of Sherlock's favorite TV series. Although the plot collapsed in the later period, and it had little to do with the main universe of Marvel, Sherlock directly abandoned the show. But no one can deny how good the plot of this TV series was in the early stage. Moreover, in Sherlock's view, Coulson can be said to be one of the most ruthless people in the life of the black salted egg. After simply asking Jane where she is now, and whether there are other people around her, and getting the address and Jane's negative answer, Sherlock opened the portal without any hesitation. Jane held the phone, and watched the sparks in front of her slowly rotate, and then formed a fire circle the size of a person. Sherlock held the phone on the other side, and greeted herself with a dazed look. Sherlock understood the shock of muggles after seeing magic for the first time. He didn't explain anything to Jane. He hung up the phone and walked through the portal. Jane stared at Sherlock in amazement until the portal closed again behind Sherlock. If it weren't for the busy tone on the phone, Jane would have thought she was dreaming. He pinched his thigh fiercely without making a sound. The severe pain told Jane that she was not dreaming, but even so, Jane still didn't react. How did her friend suddenly become a superpower? Jane felt that her CPU was about to smoke, and she couldn't figure it out. We all agreed that we were all ordinary people, but now you guys have secretly evolved, and you don't even take me with you? Jane's CPU was still overclocking, and her mind was full of her Thor boyfriend and Sherlock who had become a superpower. Sherlock on this side was also curiously looking around. This is not an old European apartment building as Sherlock thought, but a base that looks very high-tech. If nothing unexpected happens, this should be one of the bases of S.H.I.E.L.D. organized by Coulson after S.H.I.E.L.D. was disbanded. After looking at the surrounding environment, Sherlock seemed to remember something, and raised his hand to greet Jane. Hi. Sherlock's greeting. Jane's CPU that was almost burned out seemed to react, and she hurriedly walked up, and pulled Sherlock to look left and right. No, Sherlock, this. Jane was a little incoherent, and for a moment she didn't know how to express her shock. Seeing Jane's look like why did you evolve secretly without me? Sherlock finally sighed helplessly. With a flip of his wrist, Sherlock's wand appeared in Sherlock's right hand. Sherlock, holding the wand, shook it in front of Jane's eyes, and Jane showed a look of understanding. After all, in the Battle of New York, Sherlock's magic wand has almost become the iconic weapon of his vest wizard, and has become the best-selling toy in the whole Eagle Source together with Mjolnir's hammer, Iron Man's mask, and Hulk's fist gloves. Jane naturally recognizes the magic wand in Sherlock's hand, but even though she knows it, Jane's expression is still very complicated. What kind of luck is she? Her boyfriend is an Avenger, an Asgardian Thor. She originally thought that this was explosive enough, but now she tells herself that one of her good friends is actually the most mysterious and powerful Avenger wizard in the Battle of New York. Jane feels that if she tells her experience to others, no one will believe it and think she is joking. Just when Jane wanted to say something, a gentle male voice sounded beside Sherlock and Jane. "Long time no see, Mr. Sherlock, or should I call you Mr. Wizard?" Chapter 323 Sherlock's exposure in progress. Sherlock, who was holding up his wand and showing off to Jane, froze in place, as if he had been cast into a spell after hearing the familiar male voice. Even the smile on his face was frozen. Because Sherlock's CPU started to run at high speed at this time, he could not take care of some of the movements of his body. As for who this familiar voice was, Sherlock recognized it almost immediately. It was the good guy in the Marvel world, Coulson. Although this guy has always been called a good guy, in fact, it is only compared to black-boiled eggs. Among other people, this guy is also a bad guy. Sherlock was still standing there thinking frantically. Coulson didn't care about Sherlock's rude behavior. He walked quickly to Jane's side, lowered his head, and whispered something in Jane's ear. Then Jane looked at Coulson with complicated eyes, and then looked at Sherlock, who was still performing the spell of freezing in the same place. She frowned, thought for a while, nodded to Coulson, and then left quickly. After watching Jane leave, Coulson stood in Jane's place without any burden in his heart, and just smiled at Sherlock, who was still performing the immobilization spell. After a while, Sherlock finally lost the battle, and looked at Coulson, who was still standing in front of him with a smile. "Haha, Coulson, I want to say that I'm performing magic for Jane. Do you believe it?" After hearing Sherlock's words, Coulson raised his eyebrows with some amusement and slightly stretched out a hand to Sherlock. The meaning was very clear. "Please start your performance." The smile on Sherlock's face twitched, and then he shook the magic wand in his hand with a stiff head and quickly threw the magic wand into the library, and then he exaggeratedly opened his arms like a magician on the stage. Dadawell, Sherlock also dubbed himself, saying that he made such a big magic wand disappear in an instant. Then he turned around and saw an old acquaintance, Sky, who was looking at him with a complicated face. Well, at this moment Sherlock felt that he had lost all his face today. Thor, that bastard. Every time he saw him, something bad happened. Sherlock smiled on the surface, but he was cursing in his heart, just like a doll with rusty joints. He silently moved his eyes away from Sky and turned to Coulson, who was smiling. The three of them stood together calmly without saying a word. Sherlock felt that his toes were about to dig out the entire Hogwarts castle on the ground. After a while, Sherlock was defeated. He sighed helplessly and returned to his usual appearance. "Okay, you win, Coulson. I'm indeed a wizard." After saying that, Sherlock felt much more relaxed. Coulson stood there with a smile, as if he had expected it, but Sky looked shocked. After all, compared to Coulson, Sky had been in contact with Sherlock for a much longer time. It was hard to imagine that the wizard who was so powerful in the Battle of New York, the powerful wizard who built a 100-meter wall of fire with the wave of his wand, was actually his extremely unreliable boss. That's right, in Sky's impression, Sherlock's main synonym was unreliable. After all, with Sherlock's 5 uncles as a comparison, Sherlock, who was a fun person and would become a fun person from time to time, naturally seemed a little unreliable. It was really difficult for Sky to connect Sherlock's vest with Sherlock himself. On the other side, Coulson was much calmer, not to mention that Sherlock was accidentally exposed. Even the experience over the years had made Coulson develop a character that would not change his color, even if the mountain collapsed in front of him. As for Sherlock, the relaxed Sherlock began to be normal. After all, he got along very well with Coulson. Sherlock smiled and gave Coulson a long-lost hug. Hugging Coulson means he accepts, but Coulson said it's unnecessary, and he doesn't like Sherlock's way of greeting. "Long time no see, Coulson. The last time I saw you, you were covered with mushrooms," Sherlock said as he patted Coulson's back vigorously. In a place where Sherlock couldn't notice, Coulson's well-maintained smile broke for a rare moment. Amid Sky's shocked and stifling expression, Coulson whispered a complaint. "It's all thanks to you, Sherlock." Just when the two wanted to separate, and Coulson wanted to say something to Sherlock, Sherlock seemed to have guessed what Coulson wanted to do. He turned around and walked towards Sky with a smile on his face, opening his arms as if he wanted to hug this young employee whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Sherlock's abrupt turn was so abrupt that not only Coulson, but even Sky could see it. She quickly put her hand on Sherlock's chest and refused helplessly. When Sherlock was about to throw a tantrum and say that Sky, you don't love me anymore, you are no longer the little cashier who used to love me, Coulson grabbed Sherlock's collar. Okay, Sherlock, let's talk business. After hearing Coulson's words, Sherlock also put away his playful thoughts. After all, his vest had been exposed. He turned around and looked at Coulson behind him, waiting for Coulson's next words. Coulson didn't actually have much hope, but he still wanted to give it a try, so he began to introduce Sherlock to the current situation of S.H.I.E.L.D. The main point is that S.H.I.E.L.D. now has to frequently contact some supernatural or mysterious things and wants to hire Sherlock as their consultant. After all, Sherlock is the only known magician who understands mysticism. Sherlock refused Coulson's request without any hesitation. The most important thing is that Black Source Egg is a pitfall. He faked his death and got away with it. Now I don't know if he is living a leisurely life in space or hiding in his secret base as described in the TV series. But the shield that he left for Coulson still has many big holes. Hydra will definitely not only exist in the headquarters building of S.H.I.E.L.D. God knows where in the world there are remnants of Hydra who are plotting to take over the legacy of S.H.I.E.L.D. Sherlock has no interest in these troubles. Of course, Sherlock is not a devil. Although he can't help Coulson, Sherlock still recommends someone who can help Coulson, the captain. The captain is now looking for the base of Hydra all over the world. He wants to defeat Hydra and rescue his good friend. Coulson can ask the captain for help. Seeing that Coulson is a diehard fan of the captain, Sherlock believes that the captain will never refuse Coulson's request. And the captain should also need information from Coulson. This wave is a win-win situation. Chapter 324 Jane's Quantum Superposition Boyfriend. Although he knew that it was unlikely that he would ask Sherlock to be his consultant, the news that the captain was still fighting on the front line against Hydra was enough to make Coulson happy. After finishing the business, Coulson began to chat with Sherlock, taking Sherlock to visit the S.H.I.E.L.D. base while chatting. Among them, why Sherlock came to Jane was the focus of Coulson's inquiry. Of course, as a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the current director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Coulson always spoke in a roundabout way and would never ask directly what he wanted to know. Out of his curiosity and the idea of pilgrimage, Sherlock naturally had no reason to refuse Coulson's invitation to visit. You know what? Sherlock really saw a lot. The most important one was a big plane and agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that served as a base. It was not seen in the TV series, but it was really fucking big when you looked at it with your own eyes. Sherlock didn't know how big the C-17 transport plane used by the mold was, but Sherlock believed that Coulson's plane was definitely bigger than the C-17. Wow, there were all kinds of things in this cabin, from the combat command room to the laboratory, from the rest area to the work area, and Sherlock even saw Coulson's beloved car in the cabin. I don't know if this wave was a little benefit that Coulson used his power to plan for himself. Sherlock even took a photo with this big plane excitedly. When Coulson took Sherlock to visit the entire base, Sherlock was not as excited as when he saw the plane. There was only one thought in his mind, that when she sold the potion, she didn't ask for too little for the black brined egg. This base is located in a suburb of London. As a world-famous city, the price of land here can be imagined. Even in the suburbs, the price is definitely not something that ordinary organizations can afford. And the most important thing is that the location of this base is still underground. From construction to hiding, God knows how much the black brined egg cost. The most important thing is that Sherlock absolutely does not believe that the only base that black boiled egg left for Coulson is this one. Putting aside the base left for Coulson, Black Boiled Egg still has many unknown bases in his hands that he has not told anyone. It is conceivable how much money Black Boiled Egg, a black-faced and even black-hearted guy, had embezzled from S.H.I.E.L.D. Compared with the money he spent on buying potions and the money that Black Boiled Egg embezzled from S.H.I.E.L.D., it is estimated that there is not even a fraction. The more Sherlock looked at it, the more he felt that he had lost money. Of course, Coulson did not know what Sherlock was thinking. While taking Sherlock on a tour, he began to ask Sherlock why he came to Jane. To be honest, Sherlock did not understand what Coulson meant at first. That's right, Sherlock, an 8th level essay player, did not understand what Coulson meant. In the end, Coulson repeatedly reduced the twists and turns in his speech, and Sherlock seemed to suddenly realize it. After understanding Coulson's words, Sherlock patted Coulson on the shoulder with a complicated expression and said something that made Coulson scratch his head and couldn't figure it out. "Coulson, I have to say it. If you take the civil service exam on the rabbit side, I'm sure you will definitely be able to get it in one go. And you will definitely be the first in the position in the interview, a perfect score candidate." Faced with Sherlock's ridicule, Coulson, who had never traveled through time, was full of confusion and didn't understand the jokes Sherlock said at all. But Sherlock naturally didn't care and began to talk to Coulson about what he was doing here. What else could he do? Of course, it was for Jane's boyfriend, who was now in a quantum superposition state. He was sent by Jane's boyfriend in a quantum superposition state as a lobbyist, hoping that Jane could remove the 5 words of quantum superposition state. Faced with Sherlock's quantum superposition state left and right, Coulson was completely confused. Coulson knew about quantum superposition state, which was a technical term in quantum mechanics, but he really didn't understand this quantum superposition boyfriend. Are young people nowadays so profound? This was the only thought Coulson had after listening to Sherlock's explanation. He could only turn around and look at Sky, who was also a young man, hoping to know what the damn quantum superposition boyfriend Sherlock was talking about. Facing Coulson's call for help, Sky rolled his eyes and whispered to Coulson in his ear. The so-called quantum superposition boyfriend is actually very simple, which means being between boyfriend and ex-boyfriend, and it all depends on how Jane makes a decision. As long as Jane makes a decision, the quantum superposition boyfriend will collapse, either boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. After Sky's explanation, Coulson also understood what Sherlock meant. It turned out that he was here to be a lobbyist, to persuade Jane and her boyfriend to reconcile and not break up. After figuring out what Sherlock was here for, Coulson couldn't help but stare at Sherlock with a wronged look. Just now, you were invited to deal with the mysterious and superpowered people who threatened ordinary people, but you refused. Others asked you to be a military advisor to persuade their girlfriends, but you came here happily. So our careers are not even as important as love between men and women in your eyes? Facing Coulson's aggrieved eyes, Sherlock could only dodge. After all, Sherlock really didn't like to be associated with SHIELD and Hydra. The matter of SHIELD had already made Sherlock a little PTSD. Whether it was Hydra or SHIELD, they were like dogskin plasters for Sherlock. Once they were stuck, they couldn't be shaken off. It was very troublesome. Helplessly, Sherlock could only change the subject stiffly and began to ask about Jane's whereabouts. After all, Sherlock just watched Coulson say something in Jane's ear, and Jane left. Facing Sherlock's inquiry, Coulson, despite his resentment, did not hide Jane's whereabouts and explained to Sherlock. John Bull's government report said that some strange things happened in a factory in London, and we need to investigate. After a simple preliminary investigation, the space there seems to be a twisted and folded appearance. Jean went to investigate as our physics consultant. It would have been better if Coulson didn't say anything. After he finished speaking, Sherlock let out a sharp roar on the spot. Damn, this plot is familiar to me. Isn't this the beginning of the plot of Thor 2? If Sherlock remembered correctly, the beginning of this plot was because the reality gem entered Jane's body, which led to a series of events afterwards. And that was the reality gem, which could directly change and distort reality. For Sherlock, this thing was the telephone booth in the Marvel world. Sherlock naturally wanted to take a look. Of course, the most important thing is to keep Jane away from the reality gem. After all, Thor asked me to come to Jane to apologize and persuade her. Now that I'm here, Jane is still sent to the hospital. That is too unreasonable, isn't it? Without any hesitation, Sherlock grabbed Coulson's shoulder with a serious face and began to ask for the location. Seeing Sherlock's appearance of knowing something, Coulson's eyes rolled, a smile appeared on his face, and he revealed Jane's address without any hesitation. Chapter 325, Dangerous Factory. After getting Jane's address, Sherlock took out his wand without any hesitation and wanted to open a portal to stop Jane, but unfortunately, the sparks of the portal shone for a long time, but in the end, no decent portal was opened. Either the color of the sparks was wrong, or it was different from the usual round portal, and it became various polygons. Even the scene behind the door was unheard of by Sherlock. How to say it, it was like the old TV signal was bad, and according to the plot, Jane should be in an abandoned factory building at this time. The situation behind Sherlock's portal had nothing to do with the factory building, and there were even some places that did not look like scenes that could appear on Earth. After all, Sherlock had never seen pink earth and blue plants in his 2 lifetimes. Sherlock naturally did not dare to step into such an abnormal portal. After all, no one knew what was behind the door and whether he could get out after entering. Finally, Sherlock was helpless. He took out his mobile phone, opened the map, and began to experiment a little bit on the map to see how far away a stable portal could be opened. 10 minutes later, Sherlock confirmed that the stability of space would not be affected by the reality gem at a distance of 1 kilometer from the factory where the incident occurred. After Sherlock confirmed that the scenery on the other side of the portal was normal and the portal was not affected, he said hello to Coulson, who had been standing behind him and watching him use magic, and then stepped into the portal. After passing through the portal, Sherlock threw his long legs without hesitation and followed the navigation to run all the way to the factory in front. What? Why didn't Sherlock open the portal a little bigger and borrow a car from Coulson? Why did he have to rush on his legs? It was the truth. Let him go. Coulson is not the black-boiled egg he was when he was a black-boiled egg. The entire shield is almost poor, and there is a remnant of Hydra hiding in the dark, eyeing him covetously. From Coulson's introduction and Jane's phone call, Sherlock knew that the current shield was completely borrowing money from the government to subsidize the funds to fight against Hydra. Otherwise, Coulson would not be so looking forward to his or the captain's joining. After all, the joining of an Avenger would save a lot of combat power, and the saved combat power means saving ammunition and weapons. Weapons, ammunition, and personnel, which one is not made by real money? As for why Sherlock didn't put a convenient 2-wheeled vehicle in the library, Sherlock would never admit that he had never learned how to ride 2 wheels in his 2 lifetimes. It's just that he doesn't like it. It's definitely not that he can't. In fact, when Sherlock saw those Harley-Davidson cruisers, he almost cried with envy. Especially in the area where gangster culture prevails in the Eagle Source. Every time he saw a fleet of cruisers wearing leather vests, Sherlock would shed tears of envy. After about 5 minutes of running, Sherlock stopped at the gate of the factory panting, and looking at the black suits in the factory with instruments walking around with horror. Although this scene does not seem strange to ordinary people, in Sherlock's eyes, these black suits holding instruments are actually dancing on a tightrope. You must know that space is the sharpest knife and the strongest shield in the world. It is difficult for everything to escape the cutting of space. Any attack can also continuously consume energy through folding space, eventually causing the attack to fail. Space is a shield, a cage, a trap, and a sharp knife. No matter which one it is enough to pose a fatal threat. In Sherlock's eyes, this factory is almost a dangerous place full of space traps. If you are lucky, you can only fall into the infinite loop portal and experience the feeling of free fall. If you are unlucky, it is common to be dismembered, compressed, and teleported to an unknown place in the universe to wait for death alone. Even if you are even less lucky, you will appear directly in the vacuum of the universe. Even if you have the equipment and ability to ensure your survival in the vacuum, the ubiquitous cosmic rays are enough to kill you hundreds of times. Looking at this group of black suits walking and stopping in such a dangerous environment, in and out, Sherlock can only sigh that ignorance is fearless, and newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. The ancestors are not deceiving me. To be honest, if possible, Sherlock really doesn't want to enter this factory at all. After all, Sherlock is not one of the ordinary people in the factory who can't perceive space. He even feels that such space folding is fun. but helpless. On the one hand, he promised Thor to come and mediate the small conflict between them. On the other hand, Jane and he had a good relationship, and she could be regarded as one of his good friends. So Sherlock naturally couldn't watch Jane fall into danger. After hesitating for a long time, Sherlock finally took a few deep breaths, tried to adjust his state, and stepped into this place full of murderous intentions with the idea of success or death. With Sherlock's entry, the black suits in the factory stopped their work and looked at Sherlock, who came in stupidly. In fact, it's not their fault for making a fuss. After all, they can't see or sense the dangerous space traps everywhere here. So from their perspective, Sherlock is like a 007 agent avoiding infrared alarms. In the movie, if there are those infrared alarms and tense soundtracks, Sherlock's movements look exciting enough and elegant enough. It can be said that it fully demonstrates Sherlock's physical flexibility and the strength of his training. But unfortunately, there is none of this in reality, and these black suits cannot sense the space here at all. So from their perspective, Sherlock's movement forward is like a person with an underdeveloped brain and cerebellum. After all, everyone walked in through that gate, and no one made a 6 with one hand and a 7 with the other, bending down from time to time and bowing. To be honest, if Coulson had not informed them of Sherlock's arrival in advance, just based on Sherlock's posture that looked like a mental patient, these agents would probably start arresting people. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.